religious interpretations, and then ended up in kind of being a theme song of the British empiricists. And Kant, that's what Kant didn't like. There's a beautiful quote here, but it has to do with the Locke and Hume being sort of twin cliffs of empiricism. Either you would go in the direction of extremism. What did he call it? Locke left the door wide open for fanaticism, is what he said.
Oh, I wouldn't have imagined that, but okay.
Yeah,
no, he does. I remember. I read that too.
Yeah. And then, and so I mean, I'm deficient. I need to read a little more Locke there to catch up on that fanaticism. And of course, he knew Hume to be skepticism. And skepticism, of course, was what kept you from going to church, and supporting the state and the economy and everything good about life. So, and the morality, So it's just the absolutism, what Derek was talking about, exists, but it has all these not moral, but it has all of these existential reasons for happening. These philosophers believed in absolute morality and absolute necessity, affecting many aspects of life, not just cognition and morality, because of the possible consequences of trying to reverse those tendencies in society. It wasn't until Nietzsche, you had a philosopher that said, "Oh, by the way, God's dead now. And what are we going to do?" So anyway, that's I did a lot of reading this week. I got all the way to that point, all the way up to section 2 of the deduction of the pure concepts. So I have to admit, I've got a kind of a more balanced view of what Kant is representing here. Although I have some amazing stories to tell you about things that I was thinking of prior to getting to this point.
Did anybody watch the documentary that the lecturer mentioned on racism?
That's next week.
Sorry?
That's next week.
Oh.
That'll be on next week. It's on the description for next week. Yeah, look at next week.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah, it's on YouTube. But we'll be covering that next week.
Oh, I didn't realise. I thought because the lecturer was mentioning it in the one you put for week 7, is it?
That's right, but we will cover that, what you're talking about, next week. And we'll have at least 1 week of contra Kant criticism, maybe 2. We'll see. Starting next week, 1 or 2 weeks of Kant criticism.
Okay.
Yeah, I was just telling a few of them. I upset a lefty on the weekend on one of the Zoom sessions when I revealed my nihilism, and that upset him greatly. And he said, people, he has these gods called equality and plurality. And I said, they're just fads. They just come and go in history. And when you tell the left that all their grand ideals are just another set of fashions which have come and gone in history, they explode.
If we're gonna cover Hegel, I don't know if we really need to have special sessions for criticizing Kant. I mean, we've done a little. I mean, we could take a vote. You can take a vote on that, but I'm just because there is a voting. Zoom has a voting capacity. We can check. We can click on yes or no inside the.
Well, we'll see. I'm not committed to it, but we'll see. We'll do at least 1, just because this is the lecture. So, and
oh, cool.
We'll see after that.
Hey, James. So James, I had a question for you. Did you, oh, I don't want to share my screen. I just want to put my hand down. So when you said you spent quite a bit of time reading through the week here, did you, has your views of Kant softened a little bit?
Yeah, I kind of get where he's going. I read a little bit of Leibniz, a little bit more about Leibniz, and a little bit of the monadology, and sort of like got a better feel for like where Kant was at with the debate between the empiricists and the Germans, I guess. And you know, and I sort of came down to the point where I thought, well, I guess if you use certain tricks, this is all understandable, because what this is based on is kind of trying to resolve a conflict between empiricism on one hand and rationalism, Descartes, who people really like Descartes, you know, and the idea that Descartes, we have doubts, so we got to try to design some way of knowing things, which is ridiculous, which is kind of like the first meditation of Descartes is kind of like ridiculous. It's called The Brain in the Vat. But you, so you have these different systems for trying to cognize reality in the rationalist tradition, and that includes religious ideas like the pantheism of Spinoza, the disappearing reality of Berkeley. You know, you have various concepts of rationality, trial ideas of rationality, leading up to Leibniz, which was essentially, oh, I'm a scientist and I'm a Catholic, so that should work. So describing how God makes objects appear comfortably to us because he is so good, right? So that's kind of Leibniz in one crappy sentence.
Oh, that's pretty weird, because I think the universe is totally weird. Although I must admit, there's a few comfortable moments.
Right.
It just looks absolutely weird to me. I mean, humanity
Right.
looks like a tribe of monkeys that are throwing shit at each other.
That's Voltaire. Anyway, yeah, but okay. So just I'll wrap it up. But I came to a kind of like an agreement with Kant. You know, if you've got these crazy rationalists on one side, and you've got these idiot empiricists on the other, and you're trying to show us how we can look at reality from a rationalist viewpoint and arrive at certainty instead of doubt, okay, I'll ride the bus. I'll be glad to get on the bus and ride with your I don't know what team you call Kant, you know, but the Kant team. So I'll ride on the Kant team, you know, if it's going to show me how not to be a silly rationalist who needs religion to draw a picture of why reality is right, or an empiricist who have psychologically negative qualities, at least according to Kant. You know, I agree that Hume is a bit of a skeptic. He wants us not to believe that the things are there in reality. And Locke, who is before Hume, who he calls fanatic. So that's fine. I don't want to be a fanatic. I'll be glad to run Kant's bus and say fight fanaticism, and
or that it leads, you got to correct yourself, it leads to fanaticism. He was quite affectionate towards Locke.
Well, the sentence I got here.
Yeah, where was it from?
Yeah, the sentence is at the end of the first. No, it's not. Yeah, it is. It's at the it's the end of it's at B it's at oh it's only well it's at B128. Oh,
Yeah, it's
oh,
before
it's
that.
only in the B edition. It's at B128, and he says, "You're right. He left the door wide open for fanaticism. Once reason has gained possession of such rights, it can no longer be kept within the limits by indefinite exhortations to moderation." So, okay, that's nice. That's nice. I mean, I'll accept that he didn't think Locke was crazy, but he does kind of say it goes too far. The context Locke's explanation has gone too far.
It's not a case of the pot calling the kettle black, is it?
In what way?
No, it's different. Kant's point of view is totally different from either of those two other philosophers. So I have to, I'm going to have to go. It's in the second treatise by Locke, I think.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
He says
So-
in the footnotes, he says where he pulls it from. But I think we were talking earlier about the quest for the absolute, and I think that there's an affection for most philosophers to find absolute knowledge, right? I mean, is this not the holy grail of trying to find something that is absolute, even in a negation? And I think that's at the basis of Kant's affection towards Locke. But the foundation for what he's doing here with this, with the critique, is, as everybody knows, it's critiquing rationalism and empiricism. I actually just thought of something about 10 minutes ago to say, like, if those worldviews or emphasis on understanding, like I would just call them worldviews, if they disappear from our dominant culture, does Kant become less relevant? That's interesting to me, right? Like he's yeah. So David, yeah, what do you think?
Yeah, well, he's sort of fighting two ends of fanaticism. And if he's sort of established a middle ground, which we then have to navigate with the developments of science, but keep our course of rationality as something we still have a conviction about, that logic applies in this way, that the world we're describing is a world of cause and effect, and that there are limitations to what we understand as the external world actually being the real world fully. It's just the best we can do is detect the world and talk about what we can detect. Yeah, so we're in his bounds here. He set the bounds of the game. Yeah.
Yeah,
But
it's like he set the
we have more subtlety. We have more subtlety to discern. What things really are consistent and believable about the nature of space and time. It's not what we thought, and we still have the geometry with its apodictic truth, but that's not the natural space and time of objects that we can now observe in different ways. How do we comprehend that problem?
Yeah, I agree. He's kind of set the baselines for this cultural thought experiment, and he's done so by clarifying the positions of important thought leaders before him. So that very smart move, right?
He thought he did everything, except he said no organon, just the prolegon.
So I think that he personally, I think that there's not a strong tendency towards absolutism in philosophy since Descartes. I think that's one of the tricks that Descartes actually is really important for and really known for, is that is creating a book of philosophy that rejected um, the scholastics, which were the religious trend of writing on philosophy that existed up to that time. Not continuously. I think, I'm not sure if there's a beginning or an end of the scholastics, but I remember studying some scholastics from the 12th century. The 12th century is very important for scholastic writing. Thomas Aquinas and a whole bunch of Jews that lived in Turkey. So, so the scholastic writing was very important, going back to Plotinus, if that's the right way to pronounce it. So these scholastic, but there was this kind of search for the absolute. And we'll see in Hegel, the word absolute becomes important again, but Kant doesn't use it that much, I don't think. In Hegel, I think what he was going for with the absolute is anything that is that can be put on a stick, and you can say experience is absolute. You have to experience something if you're a creature. That's another thing I don't like about Kant. He pretty much admits at one point that animals have that animals need intuition. Yeah, because of the way he puts it. He puts it in the form where it's pretty clear that animals would have intuition as well, which I've always believed that they do. So there's no difference there. But the idea with the thing with the absolute is the absolute is kind of like a disappearing entity. As soon as you say something is absolute, it doesn't even matter that you said it because it's not true. It's not object. Doesn't have, as Kant says, objective validity. The absolute.
I see what you're saying.
I guess we're not really having to raise hands, but yeah, it's interesting the way you frame that, James. But I have to bring it back to very much a dichotomy between Plato and Aristotle. I mean, you take something like Osepi topoli, which was what Aristotle said, and he left it as a more or less. And that's a really interesting phrase to leave hanging out in the air. But philosophers going back to probably Plato and earlier, anyone who's trying to formulate something, to form, to create, to think, to shape something, you're gonna make those boundaries, and you're trying to reconcile them so it has some sort of unity to it. And that's from the standpoint that I'm talking about, like the shape of the idea and the truth of logic itself. So if you do something like a Cartesian comparison between doubt and certainty emerges from doubt. You see there's some parallels between good and evil. The contrast between knowing something by knowing its opposite, that system of opposite versus, and that comparison is a form of absolutism in itself. And it's how you frame it. And I think that and throughout history, we've seen people that come along and change that. So you'd have somebody like Hume, and in the art world, I always like to give this example of, what is art? And you look at a Duchamp on the wall, where a guy put a urinal on a wall upside down. And I think it's that avant-garde, it's that, hey, wait a minute, guys, check yourself. This is not what it is. It's kind of like a social reset. And so you have, in the way I frame it and the way I reconcile knowledge or philosophers is I see this movement of form versus the overreaching of form, and then the pullback, a Humean pullback to go, hey guys, wait a minute, you might not be right. So that's what I mean by absolutism. And of course, everybody throws up their own definitions. I mean, that's what you need. You need, Daniel to come in here and say that there's this other, other definition of absolutism. Are we here not talking about Kant?
Yeah, I think the absolute elements in Kant are what make me feel uncomfortable. So it's like the a priori, which I've learned to sort of like handle. Before I was going to use a black marking pen and just cover over every a priori in the book. But I realized it would take me way too long, so I didn't do it. But the other thing was I guess the other absolute is the barrier he creates, between the pure understanding and intuition. So his whole purpose I realize there's a purpose in the a priori. It creates the barrier between the intuition and the pure understanding, and through which he says pure cognition is possible. So I'm kind of like still in the open discovery phase of that, but he's made the case for cause and effect, and that I was able to finally follow the idea that cause and consequence is can be a priori. That is, we always looking for cause and effect. We're on the lookout for cause and effect. That would sort of prove that it's a priori if we're sort of like using it in a certain way. And
James,
he says it creates a form. So the form is another absolute. That's what I'm saying.
That's what
is that there are absolutes that you can pick out.
Yeah, that's the only place of consension or of agreement that I'm trying to get us to come to, is that even in that dichotomy, that you have it. You're trying. The philosopher is trying to make something that is universal, right? Sure. Now, I think Scott might pop in here. I was going to ask him something because he mentioned something that got me thinking about metaphysics. And David, you might be able to help out on this. I think Scott said that metaphysics is all absolute, is all about absolute, the universal. And I was like, what? Because
the point that Kant brings up at the beginning of this about soul, God, eternity, spirit, those things as metaphysical issues to discuss that he's not focused on in this critique. He's starting off with experience and empirical concerns. So he's concerned with the physical in this book. The metaphysical is a separate issue, and dealing with those is maybe because it's about intellection, that it is an absolute realm. It's not about a relationship to something that is empirical and imposed on us by our senses and the form of our senses, but it's about pure reasoning and logic, the form of logic in our thought and its capabilities. And so the metaphysical deductions are about more absolute. They're imposed by the form of logic, and this is different. This has to do with why is there a form of sensibility? There's no way to justify that. There's no logic that says there has to be a form of sensibility. So I was going to ask James, just so I didn't miss what you were saying, because I try to try not let things pass by me. Too many things. I mean, things pass by. James, did you say you do not find a problem with the idea that animals have intuition, and that's a consistent thing? You like that idea, and that Kant agrees with that? Was that an agreement you were stating?
Yeah.
No problem.
I hit that on, I hit that at A89.
Right. Okay. So
Yeah,
the thing they lack is some degree.
because of the way he's using it. Yeah, way he's talking about space and time. Go ahead.
Yeah. So, and who knows where a bee, how it has a sense of space, because, who knows how its brain puts that stuff together. But what they probably are lacking is the understanding that goes beyond the very, very, very basic level, because then, they would have to be self-cognizing and self-aware of their own unifying of apprehensions in order to deal with thinking about thought itself. So they obviously don't have that level of understanding, but there may be some level of stitching together things, because they may have the same form of intuition, but they may have the same experience of space, with the barest level of understanding.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
we can't assert, but it's consistent, right?
The thing you
Yeah,
also
I would say, go ahead, Dan. Sorry.
actually, no, it was more directed to you, but just let me insert just a tiny little bit to think about, David, is that I quite often use the exercise of looking at animals, especially the dogs, because I have a couple with me. And I mean, just think of the senses of a dog with in relation to their smell and their smell maps. And apparently they can have dimensionality to smell. And, we get into Nagel about what it's like to be a bat, but it's fascinating from a consciousness standpoint, that what their experience and the depths of their experience that goes into depths that we can't cognize. Now, it's just fascinating to me.
Yeah, I came to the conclusion that animals have pure intuition, and like you said, David, the only thing you can't really, it would be really off subject to sort of like start trying to decide that. But the comment from Daniel is right on. We don't know to what extent animal understanding proceeds, or what it's like to be a bat. So that's always that's always questionable. But just from Kant's discussion of pure intuition and how it works with appearances and space and time, it's pretty clear that dogs have pure intuition.
Yeah, but they probably dream, but they seem to have a pure intuition, in the sense that they seem to have object permanence to a degree. If you throw something at them, they expect a result, and if you hide it, they look around for it. So there seems to be some kind of unity that they're doing about experience and substance. They seem to have some kind of, they act as though there are substances. So it's interesting, but how far can you go with that? And how much of that are we projecting anything past that?
David, I think you can go as far as you like.
But it's not scientific. It's just,
I think you can go scientifically as far as you like too. It doesn't have to be. Philosophy doesn't constitute 100% of life. Some of us might have been scientists or engineers. I was an engineer, but you can have scientists participate in studies of animals. That happens, and you can also have
ethology, right?
And they can be cognitive studies of animals. You have cognitive science now, of which philosophy is a part, that tries to study the workings of the mind. But you also have, so you can, but you also have very deterministic scientists who are brain scientists, which is a little disturbing. So they know a lot about the brain, and it's really important for us to learn it. I think that was basically really a kind of a blocking factor with me and Kant, is understanding neurons and how they work, and at the same time trying to balance that with the incredible claims of a priori knowledge that Kant makes in all the prefaces and introductions that we were forced to read by David R. David Rail. Anyway, but so the claims of a priori-ness are kind of like hard to settle in with brain science as we understand it now.
Well,
That's all.
I heard a very
It's a comment. Yeah.
Yeah, I heard a very interesting discussion today about using, like MRIs and the nerve images in order to develop a biofeedback for the process of relieving pain. Someone in pain, which is, let's say, somatically induced something, the internal response to be able to reduce the pain by watching an image of their mind and working on it, trying to reduce the level of stress. And that this is a good way to train someone to help reduce the stress. But it's not, then when you turn the image off and they try to do it, they don't know what the fuck they're doing because they haven't been really paying attention to their mind. They've been looking at an image. So it's not the same thing as learning your mind to learn an image of it. So this is where neuroscience, thinking it's doing the brain or the mind, is really doing an image of the mind, and not knowing that difference is kind of not understanding the separation between the actual thing that you're examining and you're making appearances of it that may or may not represent the actual thing fully. They don't fully represent it because otherwise, you might have learned something from watching that picture and reducing the stress.
Yeah, but David, I think you're drawing the conclusions too soon. And the reason why is that I don't know about anybody else in the room, but I think there's always a part of any philosopher or anybody that calls themselves a philosopher. I don't know if people in this room call themselves philosophers or they just call themselves people that enjoy reading philosophy, right? I personally call myself a philosopher. And so I try and break new ground. Do I have an aesthetics? Yeah, I do. I have an aesthetics. Is it uniquely mine? Yes. Is it based in biology? Yes. Why do I read Hegel? Well, I read Hegel because I like the way he talks about the self. And if I had the resources to do it, I would juxtapose Hegel against neurology. And I would set up that ontological framework based off of what Hegel's doing to common modern day practices of neurology and brain science. I think it's fascinating, right? So you're not throwing out Hegel to just study the material frameworks of neurology. You're saying that there were people before us that thought deeply about this. So let's put that framework in, not acknowledging something that was invalid or unprovable. You don't have to give up anything with science. But I think maybe I just this word from William Whewell. It's called consilience, and it's popularized by E.O. Wilson. This merger between the two, and that's why I think there's so much room for philosophers. There's so much room for philosophy. It's not a dying science. It's not a dying discipline. I think there's more room for philosophy now than there ever has been.
Okay. So I wouldn't call myself a philosopher because I wouldn't want to classify myself in that way. I wouldn't want other people to classify myself in that way. I mean, going back to the animal thing, I think one thing we could say for certain about animals is they are not self-conscious. Where humans are. I mean, we can monitor our own, experiences, and this is, I think, seems to be some kind of
I disagree with that, by
critique, some kind of critique of Kant, because in the notes for this week we have the idea of I think, which accompanies, please correct me, every perception. Well, I don't think this is the case. I don't think that there has to be a I think. And animal, I mean, I don't have to have a I think every time I'm thinking, I'm looking at things, or I don't think that animals do. This seems to be another flaw in Kant.
Well, that's more Descartes. I mean, that's the starting point for the first meditation, I think. But probably the most famous line in philosophy.
Yeah.
but Kant just reacts to that just like everyone else almost. I mean, everything is based on trying to preserve Descartes, who has been preserved, as a matter of fact. So he's considered an important influence on phenomenology and a step forward in dialectics, and he's someone that a lot of philosophers and other people have referred to. So whether you're disturbed by some of those ideas or not, I mean, Kant's definitely accepting of and kind of like treasuring this idea of the thinking as the core part of human experience, the core of the core of human apperception or human cognition, more accurately, possibly. So that's all. Is as the I think is a starting point for these rationalist philosophers, including Kant, and that sort of becomes that is an issue. Derek, you're right that it's an issue, but I don't think it was an issue for Kant, and it's not some reason that Kant doesn't differentiate himself from the preceding philosophers, preceding German philosophers. He's not differentiating himself in following Descartes. That was a long trend, long historical trend.
Well, you don't have to preserve Descartes, because once he's asked the skeptical question, it's not even, his answer was like an interesting turning point. But it's someone was mentioning it as I came into the discussion today, it's his buildup to that question, that where he gets to a point, well, I think I've got an answer for something here. It's the buildup of the skepticism so clearly about what doubt is and about why doubt should be applied. Now, we don't follow any of his answers. We don't go anywhere after that because the track he's on is irrelevant anymore. But he's preserved just for asking the question. And even Husserl, puts him on a high point. But he says, well, Descartes took us up to the door, but he didn't go through it and really examine what that subjectivity is. He just took us there. So now we have to, you can't take anything away from Descartes.
Well, you can if you take away the mechanism. I mean, the mechanics, right? The mechanics and the animal torture, and I think we just know better than that. I'm not trying. Look, David, I agree. I agree so much with what you say.
I missed something about I don't understand the animal thing in torture.
So, there's a history of Descartes where he really just, he would, fillet animals alive, and he didn't think that they experienced life the same way we did, that they were just mechanisms of sorts. And it's horrific to think, the kind of mentality that happened back then. And, it's just,
I'm eating a fish someday. I'll find out what that meant. You know what I'm saying? It's like,
but I mean, it's not only the practice of Descartes that's deeply flawed, it's the theory. It's deeply flawed through and through. There's so many things that I don't agree with. I mean, I don't know whether that means much, but I mean, okay, he's a great thinker for starting us off. As Husserl said, he got to the door, but he didn't go through it. Great, but let's not, avert our eyes from the flaws of Descartes' thought.
No, but okay, so focus on one thing. Are you're talking about the concept of thinking, and then having thinking is presupposed by doubt, is basically what you're saying. So how would you attack it then, or how would you frame it?
No, I mean, I'm talking about the whole conception, the theoretical, conception, the transparency of mind that Descartes thought we had, the structures of mind, the indivisibility of mind, the non-extension of mind. All these things can and are challenged.
All right, fair enough.
Yes, I was thinking the same thing. There are things that you have to challenge and things that you have to face.
Yeah.
So when you're faced with challenges, you have to challenge yourself directly.
Yeah. Good point.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah, I
and
don't-
what presupposes that? Is it doubt? Like what makes you think that?
Well, you can't have doubt without certainty. It's that dichotomy, the opposition. That's the breadth of challenge.
Well, that's exactly what Descartes was saying, right?
Yeah.
So we're trying to say let's do it in a way that's not like Descartes, but we just did it like Descartes. So let's give another example.
All right.
And Descartes provided Descartes' super high grade certainty thing, which is used by Hume as a hammer. So it's not just this worship of certainty. It's establishing a definition of certainty and establishing a clear grasp of what necessity and universality are, and then seeing and then applying this and then interrogating the presuppositions of science and subjecting science to the same scrutiny that science subjects the world. So you have Galileo and Francis Bacon saying, let nature speak for itself. And then there's this incredible discovery of mechanics.
Mm-hmm.
And Hume was like, hey, look, you guys are using these words I'd like to look at, substance and causality. So Kant calls Locke a fanatic because Locke says, hey, everybody, I'm a janitor. Let's clean the house. We're going to get rid of much suppositions as possible. It's not enough to say, of course, everyone knows that X is the case. My parents said so, or the Bible says so. He's like, let's take out, and let's see if we can't get all of the things that we know about the world from the world itself. Let's see how far we can push this. And so he's a fanatic because he cheated and he wanted substance and causality to still be there. But he didn't have the courage like Hume did to hold those things up to the high definition of Descartes and see that they fail. So substance is supposed to be an understructure that's necessarily there and it persists through time like a kernel, right? Or a core. And then Hume says, actually, Locke, if you look on the screen and you look at all the pixels, no pixel gives you substance. It's not handed to you in the same way as green is handed. And then causality is the same way. Causality says that when this pixel comes up, the next one has to be red. The has to be doesn't show up on the screen. The next one may be red, but the has to be isn't itself a pixel. So, so by making certainty certain, you provide a tool for downgrading the metaphysics of physics. And then what Kant does is he says, he agrees with Hume. He says, yes, Hume is right. We don't see substance on the screen and we don't see causality on the screen. Nonetheless, when science uses these terms, it means them in a high grade way. Is it possible that they're high grade even though they don't show up on the screen?
They're necessary. I think that's deduction.
Yes, so Kant's going to have to come up with a way that establishes necessity without looking behind the screen, because he thinks that we can't look behind the screen. We can't see what something looks like, and if we can't take our eyeballs out and then see what things look like with our eyeballs gone. This is like Hegel says, you can't do it. If you destroy the mediating apparatus that colors and falsifies and edits the good thing in itself, you've destroyed all chances of getting at the thing.
Right.
And the goodness in itself is a very Platonic, is very Platonic and suppositional statement.
Well, you could propose that there was a guy before Descartes who took this all the way to the, he started to dissect his own brain, and we don't have his answers on this.
What?
If he was honest in his presupposition.
That was brilliant. You know what? We should put that on that's the YouTube opening video.
Joke a day. You ever see the movie Pi? It's about this kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah.
Daniel, earlier you asked the question about, is metaphysics necessarily necessary? And I thought maybe it's not. The reason I was thinking that it had to be is because since Aristotle, his metaphysics is an attempt to talk about all the stuff that we have to presuppose before he can write the physics. So physics talks about objects of the world and all the stuff that's happening, but in the categories is the collection of things that we know a priori, kind of. You know that, for example, you know that a cat, a real physical cat, is somewhere in space. You know that before you look at the cat. You know that the cat is a substance before you look at it. So there's certain things that are a priori. And then Aristotle was saying these predicates, the categories, are about something even deeper. And that's what the metaphysics was supposed to be. But does it have to be necessary? And I guess Aristotle thought that facts about the thing behind physics have to be necessary because we can't access them with our sensation. So we're going to have to come up with things that are necessarily true, and that will be our substitute for perception. You can perceive that the leaf is green, but you can't perceive its substance, but you might be able to do something else. But the only thing maybe that was available is something like it is necessary that there be substance in order for physical objects to exist. And then it became necessary like by accident.
I mean, this is a very interesting idea, Scott, this idea of necessity without getting behind the world behind the scenes, as Nietzsche called it. And to me, this leads to phenomenology, which we think Kant was a forerunner, giving us certain structures of a consciousness that are necessary without access to the noumenal world. You know, I mean, I find this very... and this is, I think, you know, what phenomenology is to me and why it's so, you know, interesting and where Kant has led us.
So phenomenology is sort of observational, right? I mean, the epoche is an observational step. And then it's descriptive after that. Now, I don't know how you resolve, how do you resolve from inductive to anything necessary?
That's it. That was Hume's problem, and Kant agreed with Hume that the concept of causality contains essentially an always, and you can't get an always from a gigantic set. It has to be an infinite set, and we don't have that infinite set. So going from gigantic to infinite is an illegitimate inference.
I think that Kant had an idea that the a priori concepts, that the concepts he called a priori, the categories and the space and time, were going to be a mechanism which would allow the deduction of anything necessary, allows the deduction of any necessity. And the deduction of anything, any necessity could be combined with the synthesized unities possible through induction, and they would that the mind would be able to create certainty of those objects, something a view of the world which would have objective validity and create apodictic certainty.
What is objective validity? How do you validate objectivism?
Well, that's the point, is that Kant believed that the a priori substances in the understanding, the idea of space and time and the 12 categories, were going to do the trick. And that the book is largely, the transcendental deduction is largely a defense of the 12 categories and space and time as the necessary ingredient that the understanding would use to form pure cognition of something that we might call reality, or we could call it objective presence of things. and but he believed that it would do the trick, that the necessity would be proven through the 12 categories of understanding and space and time, which I've kind of been objecting to a lot because it's very provisional. It's extremely provisional. But I think it answers that question. It answers that question of how do you prove necessity? David, I'm sorry.
Yeah. He makes a distinction between objective certainty and absolute certainty. We have objective certainty. That word is restricted to only apply to the world of sensation and our understanding of that world, the world that appears as it appears. That's it. If you keep yourself in that box, you can make assertions. Now, that leaves room for falsification.
Yes.
Yeah, he does say we get in trouble.
I would add
we
to
get
that,
in trouble when we leap too far. Yeah.
David, I would add to that though. I think if you go just a little bit wider, if you take your net just a little bit wider, right? And you think of predictability, okay? Because if you can predict something in nature, and I mean with mathematics, which is essentially a metaphysics of sorts, and I use of sorts as an ordered arrangement. It's an aesthetic, a body of aesthetic that I use. But effectively, you have mathematics, which can predict something, right? And so I'm saying if you widen your net just a little bit more to include predictability into observation, right? Because this is the idea, is I'm going to predict that something's going to happen in the future. And if I can consistently predict it in the future, then this is observable, right? So it's part and parcel.
Sounds like part of the world of appearance, yeah.
I'd like to mention that Kant would be opposed to the idea that there's a set of categories that necessarily apply, and he's going to show that this application is necessary. He reverses that. He says that the categories are derived from experience, from abstraction, but they're derived from syntheses that are necessary. So we don't come to the world with a sack full of categories and say, okay, world, yeah, I'm going to try my hardest to show that you have to fit to the substance. So next time you show me a bundling, all I see is a bundle, but damn it, I mean, I'm going to try as hard as I can to show you that substance applies to you, cat, necessarily, or applies to you, physical object. Instead, Kant is saying, he's saying, okay, world, you're giving me a bunch of pixels, and I just want to establish the conditions of me being able to be an epistemic center of this and have it under my purview and be able to detach my self-consciousness. This is what apperception is. Apperception is like the pinnacle of the synthesis act. It becomes so together that it's able to almost leap off the cone. You know, all this stuff is coming towards a point, and then at the very tip of the point, it's referring to itself. It's not saying I. It's like looking back on itself. And Kant is saying that this ability to bring things together into self-consciousness requires a kind of combination. And here's his brilliance. Where do we look to find this? Before we have neuroscience, how the hell could we talk about any like combination of sensation? It's almost ridiculous and audacious. Yeah. And he said, well, actually, we're forced to understand things through language. So I'm not saying that the concepts are going to help us at all, but the way that our grammar and the way that our logic brings the subject and predicate together and brings sentences together, that stuff we can't get away from. He calls that they're innate. We can't not use the subject predicate, like Chomsky has shown. All languages in the world have subject predicate. So we're forced to carve our metaphysics up into something that fits our grammar, and that's the Copernican thing.
Yes.
So, and then as a side effect, it turns out that over time we can abstract this synthesizing thing and say, cup, rock, cat, substance. I see what they have in common. They're bodies in space that persist through time. Oh, Now you're not applying that substance to reality. What actually happened is that the force of the grammatical subject, this, runs your attention on your perception in such a way as you're tracking something. This is ostensive, it's indexical, and it tracks. The predicate doesn't do that, does it? Black doesn't track. So you see, there's a grammatical force that is being applied in the sensation experience that is detached from sensation.
Yeah.
Tracking is not something that's on the screen, and the Platonic cat, black, and all these other predicates, that's also something that's not on the screen. These are realms of grammar, but they're really getting stitched into objects because pixels are being stitched. So it's kind of like grammatical stitching that we later reflect on and say, honey, you know what I just realized? They're all substances. They're all substances. But you got that because you compared things. So the categories are universals, just like green and cat. They're things that we learn. But the stitchings that congeal pixels together into physical objects, that's Kant's metaphysics.
And there's no experience of nature without that.
Because there's no epistemic subject without that. If you were as multiple as your sensations, you wouldn't have an experience because you would melt away as fast as the pixels did, and you'd be as plural as pixels are.
Gotta glue them up.
Yeah, and so his funny solution is that you're gluing yourself up, actually. Not you, the soul, but you, the knower, are gluing yourself together into a pixel unity that is able to come to life and say, I am. So it's a Frankenstein story of pixel stitching.
But it
So
doesn't.
is light a substance?
Light?
Is light a substance?
There are no substances in the outside of our experience. So our way of looking at something is to consider it a substance. So we think of a photon as a substance. It's our way of thinking that's imposed on our discussion of reality.
Yeah.
So, you know,
That was affirmative.
could I perceive causation in light?
You do. Everything that happens that's caused is the light interaction, except for nuclear reaction.
Yeah, I mean, Scott just said a lot. Okay, I mean, there's things I agree with and disagree about, Scott. I mean, I have my doubts about linguistic and the necessity of linguistic and conceptual thought. I mean, I think there's a possibility of pre-linguistic and a pre-linguistic thought, and you know, also about the unity of the self, whether that is really a necessity. Necessary, you know, relations, for those kinds of reasons that Scott outlined and we've outlined. I mean, I think that necessary, you know, relations is a bit of a problem. I mean, I agree with A.J. Ayer, who said that only logical relations are necessary. Other kinds of relations are not. And for this kind of reason, I don't like to use the notion of necessity. I'd rather use notions of, inevitability or inexorability. That is, you know, we'll get there, but it's not a necessary, you know, a relation.
I think I think the problem that Kant had with metaphysics is that a lot of metaphysical concepts don't really have justification from experience, so that they can only be proved essentially through the a priori concepts. So the idea you can if you want to have proofs of things like fate or fortune or
Use something a little bit more
goodness
simple.
and so forth. Yeah, just anything that's metaphysical. You know, you're going to have to write a treatise pretty much if you want to comment on things like goodness. But, you know, and that treatise will be very empirical. It'll be like Cicero. It'll have to give a lot of examples of people who did good things and then people who did bad things and so forth. So so this is kind of like it's difficult to hunt and peck for metaphysical concepts with reason, using reason. It's not that they don't exist, and it's not that they're not useful. Like things like phenomenology and ontology, and there's a lot of metaphysical things. Even logic itself is a little bit metaphysical, although it becomes real in language, like Scott was saying. So the metaphysical can impinge on the physical, but not when it doesn't. It basically refers back to pure reason. And Kant's point, I think, is that these things are resurrectable. These things are savable, and he thought some of these things were worth saving using pure reason, using pure understanding from concepts and synthesis.
And I'd like to add to that both the good and bad metaphysics for Kant are produced by these innate logical linguistic forms. So when you apply the force of grammar to pixels, you get physical objects. When you sit there and then there are 3 of these grammatical forms that you can run infinitely, like you can chop something up forever, you can run cause and effect backwards forever, you could combine and add forever. And he thinks these are the innate forms of the subject predicate, which creates the idea of a simple soul. If then, which creates the idea of causal determinism or fate, like James said. And then the last one is exclusive or. He thinks this is another power. People he thinks are born with the power. So if I tell you, in the car, I have either a beach ball or a dog, and I don't have a beach ball, then you know that it's a dog. So these are the innate logical forms. And Kant thinks that we get soul, causality, God from subject predicate, if then, and exclusive or. So in both cases, you have logical structures that are synthesizing, but in one case, they're synthesizing pixels and it's making nature. In another case, you run it, you pretend that you actually run it all the way to infinity. And then you get this weird stuff like substance can be divided forever, and it can't be. Time goes backwards forever, and it doesn't. Space is infinitely extended, and it's not. So those problems are happening because you're running these relational grammatical things, but without end. So there's like a healthy and a pathological deployment of these innate logical forms. And the pathological produces the bad metaphysics that Kant is saying, let faith handle that. And then the good deployment is making the stuff that physics talks about. And in the end, Kant provides a metaphysics of scientific method. That's the transcendental analytic.
There's another thing that he said about the concepts of objects. He said that when they're predicates of pure a priori thought, I'm quoting at A88, when they're predicates of pure a priori thought, not through predicates of intuition and sensibility, hence, those are the outer forms of cognition. Hence, they refer to objects universally, i.e., apart from all conditions of sensibility. So I thought this was pretty important because he's talking about an effect. There's an effect of pure thought, that pure cognition has a kind of what I would call a negative effect. It causes the determination of the individual objects, of the individual object to be discarded, what Hegel called emptiness. And Kant uses the term emptiness too in his when he backs into a corner that he doesn't like, he says that this results in an empty object and that's where I guess Hegel got the idea from. And the concept freed from intuition, but divorced from reality, could happen, because of this universalizing of objects through the predication of the predication formed by understanding, by pure concepts of understanding, pure predication by pure concepts of understanding. And I don't know if he actually resolves that. It's a really long paragraph. But I'm looking at A89. We either must entirely abandon all claims of pure rational insights into the realm that we care about the most, vis-a-vis the realm beyond the bounds of all possible experience. In other words, heaven, God, and so forth. Or else we must bring this critical inquiry to completion. So whenever the object disappears, whenever the content goes out of the object because of this universalization of concepts using Kant's method, then we have a choice to make. We have to choose between ending the inquiry or following it beyond experience, following it beyond the bounds of experience. So this is to Kant, this is a legitimate choice. It doesn't mean there's objective validity necessarily, but it means that we actually, at this point, we have an existential choice regarding to our use of pure reason. So I really got this, I could get completely behind. This was like Kant doubting Kant. And I just kind of like, wow, this is great. Because we have the drop-off point. We have the point that we have a drop-off point for pure reason. We can flip the lever.
I think this the ability of our thinking to run all by itself, even when it's not looking at a screen, produces these states of Buddhist meditation. I think it just occurred to me that that's what's happening when you sustain attention, like a topical attention. It's like a this. So you still have the funneling power of a this, but you're not processing any sensations. What happens? What happens when the force of this is running on nothing in particular? Does it yield insight into the deep nature, the deep structure of consciousness? Because consciousness is kind of an acting. It's an active. It's an compulsive, incessant something. It's always surpassing itself, and it's always forward and intentional. So what is this? What is this perpetual intention, this perpetual forward intentionality? And it's always running. What happens when you let it run off into the void? Do you gain insight into your deep nature?
Perpetual forward intentionality. I think intentionality is variant. I don't think it's persistent. But like you say, it is, Scott. But I don't know where you got that from Kant. But yeah, I don't necessarily believe in it. I think it's something you dial up and down according to the conditionality of existence. Is there a better word than conditionality? What the opposite of necessity?
Well, for Kant, we don't choose it. As soon as you're impinged upon, you spontaneously, he calls it spontaneity, you spontaneously synthesize. So when you look at a cat, even if you don't want to, you're going to perceive a body and a substance. So for him, it's compulsive. You can't turn it off and actually have the world fall apart into pixels without some effort.
So it consists of what in a substance? Intentionality in a substance?
The force of judgment, which brings sensations together into physical objects, is not something that we choose to run or turn on or off or intensify or weaken. It happens as soon as you open your eyes and you have self-consciousness. So if I open my eyes and look at this book, I can't help but combine the pixels together into the book body and then imagine it as being the same book through time. So it's not optional. It's a compulsive, spontaneous synthesis, not one that we can stop.
If you think of it as a cat, as opposed to thinking of it as a body, you are still thinking of it in a way that involves not just sensibility, but concept. So there's always a combination of the intuition and thought, concept. You're attaching concept, and you might call that structure. You might call that, part of the phenomenological structure of cat. But having that concept, this identifying in your mind, cat's over there. You've done that concept attachment. You have a realm of, in other words, a concept is something you can generate in unlimited numbers of intuitions about. The cat would look like this on the back. The cat would climb over this. The cat looked like this. The other. You can generate that because you attach it. The intuitions, the mere sensations, are now connected to a concept. So you have both.
That's a good way of putting it. You have this atemporal platonic unifying power, and you kind of bring it down into space and time, and it acts as a binding power. That's kind of like actually how Plato and Aristotle saw this. They saw the forms as kind of extra dimensional things that were in this world of rotting clay and hair, and they kept things together and bound them together. Kant is saying that's nice. That's a nice simplified metaphor. Let's really talk about pixels and how you're able to keep them together in a more precise way.
The concept could be as basic as a body, but it could be as more everyday as a cat, which includes body, because it's a concept. It's already a glued set of intellectual properties together. There's going to be a concept.
Yeah, synthesis works for, Kant says that synthesis works for intuition and sensibility, not just in the understanding. So the idea that once we become familiar with combining concepts, or also with appearances, we also become familiar with combining the appearances and intuition. So the word I was looking for that I couldn't think of was contingency. So existence has contingency. It doesn't just have necessity. It also if it only had necessity, then we would all be existentialists for sure. But because that existence is contingent, then we actually have we have freedom. So a lot of us are getting way beyond Kant, in various ways. But I thought the comment on the cat, was apt, because the synthesis works for intuition. We are able to take concepts and using the understanding, pure concepts of the understanding, such as time and space, we can play with the cat mentally and form new appearances that actually didn't come from sensation. They're just posited by the imagination, which is a really important part, by the way, of Kant's theory. We can't neglect to talk about the role of the imagination in the understanding.
Yeah, I just want to assert the a priori nature of a cat.
I mean, this is. I
want you to know it's not pure a priori, but it is an a priori. There's an a priori content to it. There's no such thing as in mere experience. It's pure sensibility. It is something that has to have a necessity to it.
I don't understand this. It sounds like Plato's forms.
Explain. I don't know.
Scott, how would you?
Cats are so interesting. I mean, I appreciate that as a appreciation of cats, you know, because I watched a video just the other day, and I've got the animal flag on in my YouTube algorithm. So results. So the animal flag is giving me the pet flag is giving me a cat that behaves like a dog. So there's a video about a cat behaving like a dog. It's such a beautiful video. It's great. You know, it's not like doesn't look forced. The cat fetches just like a dog fetches and has expressions about the ball when he's reacting to the ball before it gets thrown, exactly like a dog has. So it's like, holy shit.
I call this, hey, James, I call this big data determinism.
Big data determinism.
Right? Okay. Because, you know, if you think about the big data world, this ontological framework that's being projected back to us, it's a recent development of experience and phenomenology. But Scott, let me fill in the blank here for you on something. If I were to say a pixel is, okay, now before you answer that, I'm going to guess that you're going to say a pixel is a perception and something like rationalism. Is this kind of the key, or is this how you would frame an individual unit, or an individual pixel is what?
Perception is different from sensation. It's a sensation.
So sensation and perception?
There's a place in Hume where he talks about like the basic elements of perceptual experience. And so unsurprisingly, he thinks that big things are made of small things. And if you ask Hume, what's the smallest thing? He says, let's be empirical about it. So he actually tells you what to do. You draw a spot on a piece of paper and you put it on the wall and you walk backwards. And right when the spot disappears, that's the minimal sensible element for vision. Mm-hmm. So Kant inherits this idea, and he's just as radical as Hume. For Kant, when sensation arises, there's really an explosion of multiple sense consciousnesses, and each one is separate from every other. So we live in a post-synthesis consciousness, and we just sit here and stupidly think that this single space came to me as one space. Actually, every pixel in your visual area originally was its own consciousness. And through a miracle of speedy rasterizing action, these pixels have come together and become parts of one space. Now space is the thing, and these are just parts of it. But originally, there were billions of consciousnesses, and they didn't even know that the gap between them was spatial. They were absolutely separate in the weird Leibnizian way. For Leibniz, you have all these monads. And then if you ask the question, what's between them? What's the stuff what's the containing background stuff that they hang out in? And you're not allowed to answer that. We don't have access to that. So the original sense consciousnesses are point-like, but we can't say that they're already in space because space isn't there yet. They're just separate and external in a metaphysical sense. They're metaphysically external to each other. And then Kant says, but guess what? We have an a priori form of intuition, by which he means that we supply this gap between the points. And if you run enough combining action long enough, you'll see what this gap is. It's flat 3 space. So originally there's billions of pixels, and they're not spatial. We should call them pixels. We should call them consciousness islands. There's billions of consciousness islands, and later on we zoom out and we combine them by providing the wedge that goes between them, and that wedge is space. That's called the form of space.
I seriously object. I seriously object to this notion of consciousness islands or pixels. I mean, in Kantian terms, surely we're talking about the manifold. the manifold.
right,
I mean,
right.
sure, yeah. I mean, but I mean, these are the preconditions of a consciousness, not islands of a consciousness. You know, they're preconditions.
These are preconditions. That's right. And our consciousness is post-synthetic. So Kant has to fantasize about what things were like before synthesis, and of course we can't do that because we're too healthy, we're too unified. But before unity, there would be plurality.
Well,
Yeah,
I don't, yeah, I'm not grasping that myself, but go ahead, Derek, I'm sorry.
No, I mean, yeah, but the plurality is not an aspect of a consciousness. It is a precondition of a consciousness, like a physical brain. A physical brain, I would hold, is not, you know, a consciousness. It's one of the preconditions of a consciousness. Or,
Yeah,
the idea of a, or
Right.
the idea of a brain in a vat, I think a brain in the vat can be conscious, because you need a interaction with the world, and interaction with the world is another of the preconditions of a consciousness that perhaps provides us with the manifold experience, which becomes a consciousness.
Well, that you're looking at it from a reasonable
true.
scientific perspective, but even in that reasonable perspective, when you're getting bombarded with all these photons, each signal that goes down the optic nerve is its own individual wavelet. It's its own individual signal. So you're getting many separate signals, and these really are separate. So
no, but
this
No, but they can be combined. Okay, I mean, this is the idea. This whole idea is taking distinctions, between objects, which you say are pixels, but really the objects are just simply apparitions, or their appearances, and so the appearances are manifold, and the appearances, are physical, and but they don't have consciousness.
Yes.
No, there's no consciousness like that. But each perturbation from a photon. So you get photon, you get a hit, and then when you're hit, something happens. There's a high amplitude perturbation happening. So Kant is saying that you're getting billions of these perturbations going on, and that's plural. So consciousness arises as a plurality of consciousnesses.
Yeah, but Derek, take a deep breath on it, because I think you guys were absolutely onto something, especially with the concept of light and photons. I mean, for Kant to be able to break this down in a way that is sui generis with the way photons exist in physics, I think it's brilliant. Really, I think it's brilliant, because we know that that's how it exists. The only thing that I would add to it, and where my thinking and research is focused on, has to do with the up-down spin in quantum physics, right? So there is a left and a right. There is an up and a down. So that added component is what I'm more or less focused on.
We don't perceive that in our perceptive system so readily, because we don't aggregate that information, but we do aggregate lines and boundaries of things, and that happens before consciousness. That is done at a level in our brain that we are not engaged in what you're calling consciousness, but it's part of sensation. So you might want to consider expanding the word consciousness to have levels, the way the phenomenology in Hegel,
of course,
allows for levels of description of consciousness. And the first one is the photon hitting, each separate neuron individually with their level of consciousness, which, ain't much. Rocks too, not much to say about published rock knowledge, by rocks. But
So what is one of these pixels?
It's just a presentation. It's a presentation. It's a given object according to Kant. It's a what do you call it? An action
Kant talked about pixels, did he?
Presentation.
It's a manifest perception.
No, he didn't. He talked about a manifold, and it's really being turned into it's going. The thing that bothers me is the use of the plurality of consciousnesses. Anyone can sort of describe a plurality of consciousnesses as terms of a community, or even an internal community of a possibly schizophrenic person, or a person with a complex consciousness, with an unconscious and a conscious, according to Carl Jung, and just a simple, inner relation of different types of selves, to usually 1, 2, or 3, according to what
We
psychological
don't see
theory you're
pixels.
following.
We don't see pixels.
No, I know
Well, a
that, but
little
what's
bit.
the point?
A little
Wait,
bit.
We see airy discs. The sinus airy describe
Yeah, they
the
get
disc.
in space. What happens with the screen is in space, the pixels actually do become combined because we have a limited number of cones in our retina, and the limited numbers of the cones of the retina can only sort of like react to a particular combination of pixels. So on the screen, that's why I really dislike that. That's why I really dislike that analogy. But the retina will decide, the formation of cones on the retina for the particular viewer will decide what the delivery of let's call them microsynaptic vents will be.
I suspect the airy disc is actually an objective phenomena.
The aerial disc, what's that?
The Aries disc is an objective phenomena. That's
I don't know.
a
I don't know what that is.
point of light. It's in optics. It's a case where, for example, in a point of light, the maximum amount of its quality you can get is something like 84%. And 16% of that quality gets lost in all the other points of light.
Mhm.
And this can actually, demonstrated as an objective phenomenon.
are you talking about perception having a certain
Well,
relationship?
no, I'm not talking about perception because I'm saying it's objective.
Yeah. Okay. What is it called? An Aries light?
I'll look it up for you. And
I think
I'll
he said
post
I
it.
think he said Aries disc. Yeah. Anyway.
But,
Thank you, Stephen.
We
That's
have the
interesting.
idea of a pixel, let's say. We assume that every part of that pixel is 100% until you get to the edge, and then it's 0%. That's not actually what happens in physics. In physics, every part of it is 85%, and when you go beyond the edge, it's 84%. When you go beyond the edge, it's 16%. You think you've departed it, but you haven't departed all of it.
Right.
It's not a complete on or off situation.
The pixel thing is an attempt to give a modern, descriptive, clear, isomorphic description of what Kant is talking about. That's not a mathematical equivalence in other ways about 100% this or that. Scott didn't say how many neurons in his mind constitute a pixel, but he talked about.
But the problem is it's a fiction.
It's
a
all
fiction. No, it's not all a fiction, David. I'm sorry. Philosophy does demand careful choices in using in language, careful choices in description. Doesn't allow any invention, to pass. And metaphors are okay. I'm not saying metaphors are bad. All I'm just saying is the same metaphor doesn't always answer all questions.
I think Stephen's got some validity here. I mean, the thing is that if we are going to use a framework of pixels, right, then let's just extend it a little bit, include what we know of light. And I think you're onto something, Stephen. I do. I think you're on. It does make sense. So, keep working on that one.
Here we are. Here's a link for you. It's like when you build a telescope. This is sort of the stuff you got to know if you're working on optics.
Brilliant.
Airy disc. Oh, okay, cool.
That's it. You can create the perfect optics, but you cannot get more than 84% of the light within your ideal frame.
It has to do with the diffraction of the circular aperture.
It's not the eye that does that. It's the refraction.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
Like the phenomenon of having a circle, right? Yeah.
Yeah. And what basically what I was saying is that there's only so many cones in the retina, and there's only so many and there's only so much so many neurons that are going to be juggling that information on the way through your brain. It goes to the back of the brain first before any other processing is done. So yeah, there's going to be a lot of interference. There's going to be a lot of averaging in light and disappearing of information, according to this airy disk that Stephen brought up. Beautiful. And there's so the end result is going to be an approximation that we can count on, but we might also have doubt about, and the doubt gets translated into what do we know of David or Scott or Daniel or anyone that we can sort of say they are the actual image that we're perceiving now, and this is the we know who this information, we know who is the person talking. Actually, I just looked for the green rectangle myself, but
Everybody's stumped on the airy disk.
it's beautiful. I love it. Yes, 84% only. As soon as you have refraction, you only get 84% of the photons. So too bad. Yeah.
Well, there's an interesting aspect that you can actually, when you could try and create the perfect optics, and you can't get 100%, but what you can do, you can tweak your optics, and you can tweak them either towards better contrast or better resolution. So better resolution means you can see something that's finer, but you're losing a bit of contrast. Now, contrast, for example, is if reds, all right, there's a red flower, and most of your red light, most of your red image is concentrated in that flower, but a certain amount of it is bleeding into where the green's supposed to be. And you can do it in photography, for example. A very high contrast lens is one that's getting more of the black where the black should be, and more of the lights where the light should be, and more of the red where the red should be. But low contrast is losing the red to green, a bit of the red to green. So you're getting a mushier colour, but that actually enables you to see a more fine image slightly once you're getting very close to this perfect optics.
So every eye is different, and every perceptual system of each person is different, and even cameras have variance. And what we're talking about pixel is not the exact number of photons coming in, but the reaction of the system to what comes in. And I do or don't get a green reaction at some point. I have to have enough. It's not one photon making it green. It's like, thousands of photons were enough to trigger this chemical reaction that went up to my spine, up to my wherever, to the cortex. So it's an aggregate, just like a CCD, pixel. Well, it's not one. They're not looking for one photon. They're looking for enough to trigger that one is on. And then to represent the image, we turn on a green pixel on your screen, or, a blue and a red next to it. So we're talking about aggregations, not exactitude, right? Anyway, we know that.
But what creates the sense of color is the wavelength, and is the wavelength in the particle.
No. It's a differential of wavelengths. You see all colors, even if you're in a red light. You see all kinds of colors because your light is a construct in your system, not just the wavelengths coming in.
Interesting.
I can describe a science experiment. You take two colors of yellow, just slightly different, and you take a black and white picture with each one. Now you go into a blackened room and you project those two slides up on the screen with two slightly different yellows. and you make the images overlap up on the screen. And when those images come on top of each other and exactly match up, you will see all the colors originally there, not because there's some addition and subtraction of frequencies, but because your mind can now construct the difference of what was lower frequencies. Somehow your perceptual system, I saw this in a classroom. You see the juicy fruit, every color. There are only two colors up there, yellow and yellow. They're so close. Your perceptual system makes the color. Now, it's not to say there's not a physical equivalent to color.
Yeah, it's wavelength.
Yeah, that's the physical equivalent. That is not the same as human perception of color.
Variance, yeah.
Yeah, human perception of color is an accident having to do with the perceptive apparatus and the choices, the evolutionary choices that were made.
The ability of the brain to make divisions between things, the way we say good and bad, left and right, up and down, black and white. So we make the distinctions, and that becomes for our perceptual system color.
And you know what the really cool
Red looks nothing like 666 nanometers. They're just totally different things.
What is?
Red is between 620 and 700 nanometers. That's what it is. But 666 nanometers red, they're different. They're different things.
Not sure we can tell them apart. But the idea of pixel, Steve, was what Scott described, you know, the dot that you walk far enough away, it's gone. But when you see it, just as it disappears, that's what we're talking about, something like that. It's very conceptual.
You know, it's supposed to be the tiniest building block of perceptual content. That's it, like the smallest units.
Yeah.
And then also there's a temporal atom also. There's a duration to a moment, but the moment is also very small. So the length of the duration of a moment is also a kind of a tiny element of experience.
But you guys, here's what I would say is that if Kant was alive today in this meetup, which would be kind of interesting.
He's right here.
I would say that he would reconcile our current knowledge of photons in a way that, you know, matched his philosophical views. And so I think that's kind of where Stephen's going with that. And I think it's completely valid to reconcile it against that. It may be conceptual, but I don't think the work is done unless we take what we know in physics today and then improve upon his concepts.
I don't think he was really far off in looking for a phenomenological answer. I think the idea of appearances is actually been very strong in philosophy. So we don't have to break it down into the perception apparatus from a philosophical viewpoint. We might need to do that in an experimental capacity. And there's a lot of discussion about whether philosophers are really on the right track when they're not being experimental. In other words, if you've got a concept like appearances, you ought to be able to test the concept through experiments. The same thing for intuition and pure understanding. And that would be a difficult road to hoe. But on the other hand, we do have progress in brain science, and we do have some brain scientists who are able to use MRIs to distinguish one kind of thinking from another. So this could be a good field of experimentation in cognitive science, is kind of grading the Kant and some of these other philosophers according to how closely they're able to map an experiment in cognitive science using MRIs and equipment like that. So, or even human guinea pig type experiments, you know, where you have people go off and one group of people describe the colors, and another group of people describe their feelings when they saw the colors or whatever, you know. So but it wouldn't have to be purely psychological, but you have a lot of psychological studies like that. So this model that Kant has some interesting attributes. So the idea of the synthesis is probably the most important thing, and you guys did a lot to explain synthesis. But I think one of the things that I didn't really pick up from the conversation was this idea of imagination. That imagination is driving. That imagination is what's driving synthesis. That we think of something in the imagination, and then a synthesis occurs, and that's when synthesis occurs in the understanding. Is the conception coming from coming from the imagination, which in turn drives synthesis. So does anybody else have comments about that?
I have a comment. I have a comment. I was having my video here, but just I'm not an expert philosopher here, but I'm listening here. The visual world. What happens with when we hear something? I'm thinking of just the brain being this having this capacity of predicting. Like we're always predicting when someone is speaking, we're predicting what's going to come next. So we do these predictions. So when we go to a concert, let's say, and I've been in concerts where I don't know a lot about the music and I get bored, but when I go to concerts that I know lyrics, I really enjoy it because my brain is predicting. But in reality, I'm leading something in my imagination. So I would like to hear a little bit what do you think about this world, not just the visual world, but also the other senses or others, like how we relate something we smell and create these sensations, or does this has to do with the synthesis? How do we combine these different senses, not just the visual one?
Yeah, this synthesis is a combination of concepts. So we have in our mind thoughts or concepts, right? So we have thoughts like the information that you had going to the concert. You already knew the lyrics. You already knew what you like. You had experience with some of these bands, perhaps. So you the idea is that you would come to the concert, with your own concepts that were already well understood. And they would be combined when you into something we like into aesthetic experiences like enjoyment, or the enjoyment and the aesthetic experiences would occur, and you might gain new information from finding out what a particular singer would do with a song, or a musician would do with a song, and how they would transform the song in their own way, maybe change some lyrics, maybe adapt their own style to the songs they were singing. So that those new pieces of information would be synthesized out of what was occurring, what your own sense perception was doing, and what you already brought to the concert. So and also your predictions of what the concert was going to be like, they would be a part of it as well. So that's what we mean by synthesis. Your mind would synthesize from experience at a concert, for example.
And
I'm thinking
you saw around you also, every sound and every vision, every tickle and itch and heat on your skin, the sour taste in your mouth, the dryness after you smoke the pot, what you're smelling, all those sensations come together into a unified consciousness. That's synthesis.
I was thinking of this example of the concert. Probably I forgot to mention. There's a lot of noise and people are singing, and probably it's very hard to listen actually what it's being sung or the actual lyrics, and your brain is predicting and creating something you're actually not listening. So probably I forgot to mention that. How much is that consciousness, or how much is the real world versus what you are imagining of it?
Oh, you have to decide, Ada. I mean, I was just giving you my opinion, but reading the text, I'm coming to the conclusion that there's a lot of drop-off points in reason. So there's places where you are predicting, and predictions don't always come true. So that's a very good example of a drop-off point. You make a prediction, you're not able to complete the circle. You're starting with a prediction, you're testing the prediction during the, you know, and then at a certain point in the prediction, either the prediction comes true or completely misses. They don't actually perform the song that you predicted that they were going to perform, or maybe, you know, the hair color of a particular band member was different from what you predicted it was going to be. So the predictions can go awry, and that's fair because it's only a prediction. It's a kind of like it's a calculated construction of the mind that isn't calculated in a way that it's always apodictically certain. It's not always in a form that becomes present. It could actually come in. The reality could come back to you in some other form, and you would just simply have a null prediction. You'd have a prediction that was nullified by the actual experience. So that's all it means.
Okay, and so would you say that the imagination is another one of these drop-off points? Is something that's happening there, and where's this extra factor, you know, coming from? I'm thinking there's another situation in a free will. I mean, if there is free will, there's this some other factor. Where did this extra motivation come from? I mean, you know,
spontaneity.
Yeah. I mean, but can we think of, you know, a complexity, ever decreasing, you know, a complexity and a multiplicity where distinctions tend to break down and produce things that weren't there in the original formulation. I mean,
when you're reading Kant, that doesn't come up a lot, but it does come up in a few places. And so I think it matters. Sorry, David. We were talking over each other. Go ahead.
Yeah, I didn't get to say anything. Sorry. The question of which she asked earlier about the concert hall, it doesn't matter what they say. It matters what you experience, because you didn't go there to hear the exact sounds and noises. You went there for a relationship to what you heard. Now, you don't necessarily want to hear the squeaks on Yitzhak Stern's, you know, violin or Perlman's violin. You want to hear whatever is projected to you and have a relationship with that. If you care about the other thing, get a recording and study the scratches. That's not really why you're in a concert hall. It's for your interaction. So that's a really different question. What reality is that you're interested in? The reality of the performance was different for each person in a certain way. So that question wasn't well formed, I don't think. Derek's asking a different question.
No, I think my question is related to yours.
You know, I think Derek's extending it, David. And in other words, this question was about a prediction to a certain extent, but also expectation. So the idea that these different forms of thought, these different kinds of concepts, prediction, expectation, freedom, you know, should I be spontaneous, or you know, should I act or not? The idea of and there was one other I think you mentioned, Derek, but they add up to this kind of human existence, human experiencing, and the kinds of ways we can put our synthetic reason to use. And some of these are very safe. We could sort of sit in the corner and just do math problems, and we're maybe really good at math and we'll get 100% every time, or we're just trying to predict what shape that cloud is going to turn into next.
Right. So
and this was fun. In some parts of the United States, I know you can actually get shapes out of the cloud. You can say that's a rabbit, that's a squirrel, that one, you know. So it's a lot of fun. But that's a human head, you know. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, the imagination, according to Kant, is it's subservient to the understanding. It's used as a tool. The unification occurs through imagination, because you have to have all these separate things and travel across them. That's imagination, not the present, but all of them together. Yeah. So you have to be doing imagining, and the unification that makes it empirical experience is understanding, which is something principled and subject to rules. Now, when you don't subject it to those rules, you're creative. And do you care whether it corresponds to an objective reality? There's only one objective reality. We can take our instruments out and measure it. But if you don't care about that, then you have all those other forms of thought, like prediction and guessing and feeling and all that other great human stuff.
That's a good point. Kant defines the productive imagination as like compulsive, non-optional synthesizing. So like you said, you could take that leaf and you can write a poem about it, and you can even cut it into doilies. But the fact that those green pixels are coming together into a substance, you're compelled to fantasize that behind the colors and changings of appearances, there's a stuff or an understructure or something that is a thing that occupies space and persists through time. And that is constituted by imagination. Imagination is the very material of nature. So Kant's imagination is extremely strong. It doesn't just put things together, it stands in for. Imagination stands in for substance and causality. It's like the world stuff.
And the real world doesn't work that way, because he says on the bottom of B164, things in themselves, that means apart from any understanding of them, things themselves conform to laws of their own. Forget about it. That's the New Jersey translation. But appearances are only representations. As mere representations, they have laws of connection. That's laws of connection save that which they have none except what the connecting facility, you and me, put into them. It prescribes it. So we prescribe like nature.
Yes, that's right. Imagination is compelled fantasizing, but the compulsions are coming from understanding. And the rules of compulsion are the grammatical rules of subject, predicate, and then kind of the other operators that allow us to string things together. But the primary ones are the fantasy of extension across space. You fantasize that. And then the fantasy of persistence through time. Those fall under the subject. So the grammatical subject is directing the imagination to come up with this horseshit fantasy that there's a stuff existing through time. But really, it's your own biological negentropy that's fantasizing. I mean, that's the real substance. And then the predicate, there's a continuum of qualities. There's many, many reds. Red means from orange to violet, that span. It's a sorted collection of particulars. Like the cat face can only be this wide, otherwise it's a possum. So Kant is taking predicates of things like cat and table and breaking them up into bundles of spans. And that span is, again, in the imagination. You move that cat face from possum to giraffe to dog to cat. You're doing all this in the imagination. The imagination is even providing the universality of the concept. It's providing the continuum of variations inside of things. So
I don't know how true that is. I think we bias the way we take in information.
I think Steve has.
There's bias, but there's some things that you can't help. Like if you look at a circle, you can't help it but seeing it as circular. I mean that's a bias. You can't because you're tracing it. Kant says this. You're tracing over it in the imagination, and you're saying, oh, that collection of HY is really.
I haven't taken LSD yet, but I have been told that you can see the circle as other things.
Yeah, you need
by LSD pilots.
That's good. That's good. That's right. Yeah, the imagination can be derailed, and that's why psychedelics are such great tools.
I'll give you an example of bias.
The Dalai Lama recommends that Westerners take more LSD. I don't know if anyone knows.
I'll give you an example of bias. When I was, maybe I was 6 months old or 7 months old, I was listening to my parents speak. Of course, I couldn't understand them, but I was hearing the sound. I knew communication was going on, but I was hearing sounds which today I wouldn't really hear. Like, for example, I was hearing the sound resonating off the wall was intense. My mother in particular, I noticed, blew a great deal of air when she was speaking, because I could hear not exactly a hiss, but the sound of the air going out of her mouth. Now, of course, later on, I don't hear these things, or I don't perceive them. I perceive my mother's voice in a certain way. I no longer pick up that hiss of air, that she's very strong in blowing air, or the particular qualities of my dad's voice. My awareness is picking out their voices in a way which is more useful. I'm getting rid of the sound of the resonance on the walls and stuff like that. So my consciousness is focusing on the perceptions in a way that suits it, that suits its own action.
And that's very poignant. Chan Buddhism has a nostalgic take to this early childhood, pre-linguistic, pre-socialized automatic interpretation. Yeah, when you're a kid, you don't know what's more important, the hissing of your mother, the smell of her armpits, or the instructions, go to school now. I mean, all this stuff is coming at you. You don't know what to filter out. So maturation is a reduction and a filtering. Anyway, Chan Buddhism, I'm sure every religious tradition is, but the Chan people, the Zen people are really into this, like, before you had copied everyone else and become an absolute sheep, the world was much richer. And it can be rich again if you stop mediating your experience through language.
I don't mind.
Yeah, but Stephen, I'd like to commend you. I can only remember to when I was 9 months old.
9 months. Oh, that's pretty good.
That's pretty good. Yeah. Wow.
That would have been the crawling stage.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
In
I
fact,
think it was about 7 months when I started the crawl. I was cooped up, the baby, whatever it is, bassinet or whatever. My muscles not strong enough to move much. But finally, I got to this point where I was strong enough to crawl, and then I took off. I was free at last. So they've been stuck somewhere all the time.
Wow. So you are my brother.
But I
So
completely,
in the crawling stage, did you hit your head against the table legs?
That's not the memory that I have, but I have other ones. But I commend you. I mean, you're my brother in remembering things before 9 months old or before 1 year old.
yeah, I did plenty of that, Stephen. I like this idea of bias because bias is an example of the kind of breakdown in the flat kind of description of mind ontology and phenomenology that Kant is doing. So the description is fairly flat. It becomes alive, I think, in the subject of imagination. The fact that there's this concept of the apperception sense. The 3 steps to understanding is apperception, is sense, and then imagination, and then apperception. And apperception results of is the 3rd step in cognition. And so I think that's a good concept. But there's all these different things that are kind of chancy. The idea of predictions, the idea of that you mentioned, bias, the fact that we have filters that we've installed for various reasons. They weren't all installed in childhood. When we began to make political affiliations and heard different political ideas, we began to instill our minds with bias. He doesn't ever talk about memory. And that's kind of a failure in his ontology, which separates his ontology of mind from modern brain science.
So there is no real point of balance in politics.
He never does that.
There's no real point of balance in politics. They're always chasing the good,
because everyone has a bias.
The extremes. Yeah. But that balance doesn't actually exist. There's only the biases. You can either go hot or cold.
Well, I think the way you can break, there's another way you can break it in political science, and that is to instill information. So like if let's say I'm a Democrat and I'm trying to get Republicans to support better water, so I'll start to promote ideas about the people getting diseases from the bad water supplies. There, as a matter of fact, a better example is climate change, where the fracking is a really good example, because they have so much fracking in the United States. You know, it's like they realized how much money they were going to make under Obama. They realized how much money they were making from fracking, so they started to. But then people who wanted to promote climate change, um, uh, basically the idea of climate change were basically showing videos of people of spigots that could be lit on fire. You could pour water out of a spigot and get it to catch on fire. So the idea of like water contamination became a very big issue. So exposing anything like that would help you politically by changing biases. People would begin to be very biased against anyone who would contaminate water supplies or would support the contamination of water supplies. And that could be the energy industry, it could be city governments, anyone you want to point the finger at that you want to have people that you want to point the finger at could be implicated in that kind of contamination. So that's just one example. Politicians can do this for a lot of causes, for a lot of reasons, and that will change people's minds. Stephen, you can get people to change their positions on those issues.
I wanted to mention something about imagination and about emotion. You know, like when I think of the a priori, sensations of space and time, I think before that is feeling. You know, like you could think of like an amoeba or something that it can kind of sense what to go forward to or away from, and that's just like a kind of a basic kind of feeling. And that I think that is sort of like a core, an early emotion kind of thing. And that kind of draws forth the space and time representations, and that it's actually emotion that's in there that creates, that begins to create an experience. And that's what really is going on, is to kind of allow ourselves to be in experiences that we utilize, what we perceive, to create an experience that's guided by a mood, by an emotion. And I think that's kind of like missing in there. And I think, emotion is very connected to this idea of imagination. And when you kind of just, say imagination without emotion, I think, you're losing the whole kind of basis of really what's going on and what's driving, one's experience, and that the experience is the kind of cosmological kind of thing that's going on.
Yeah, Kant would agree with you. The later critiques are higher than the previous one, and the highest one is the one that you're talking about. So the first critique is just looking at the pixels and the physics, and the next one is desire. But then the highest one of all is this taste or feeling thing. So it's there are drives that drive the drives, and our perception drive is driven, we know, by survival. But for Kant, it's a practical drive driving the perception drive, and then even above that is this teleological, it's like super drive, and he thinks that the highest one is the highest.
Yeah, no, I would agree 100%. Derek, you had your hand up before me, but I really want to elaborate on what Patrick was saying. You're muted.
Oh, you're muted, Derek.
Okay, so yeah, I just had a small point in my mind, but it's not a relevant point. But I would certainly hold that cognition, in an evolutionary sense, is prior to affect or feeling. I mean, that's why it's not relevant. It's not really a relevant point.
I don't know about that. I don't want to split hairs on that or delve into that. I just want to acknowledge what Patrick had said. Sure. And also agree with Scott about the hierarchy of Kant. And this is confirmed for me with the work of Antonio Damasio. Is a neuroscientist who talks about felt experience. So we can talk about emoting and felt experience as the constituents to consciousness. And so felt experience and emotion. And the reason why is exactly what you were alluding to, Patrick, is the pain avoidance. So it's a move, and this happens at a cellular level, right? So cells will move away, not from pain avoidance. They don't have a spinal cord, right? But they move away. They move towards a state of homeostasis, right? And it's that concept that you're on the right track. I really do think so.
Yes, but I mean, I think I would have to say, I mean, you could not, attribute feeling to individual cells. Oh, I could not.
But you got to take feeling in a different sort of sense. It's a felt experience.
I think it's a misuse. I'm sorry. I think it's a misuse of words. I mean, I know people use words like feeling and consciousness in very, extended ways, but I'd really rather not use these words in that sense.
Well, wait a minute. It's like, I can't say like, I'd rather not use that word. I mean, there's a whole body of work that's done by Damasio, right? So
yeah, I mean, I've read it.
I mean, just the way we talk about Kant is I'm saying, look, like use his words as he's using them. And that's all I'm doing. Use his definitions as he's using his definitions. And the felt experience has to do with our ability to feel pain. So I don't know, how do you want to, what would you change that for? Or like, what words would you change?
Sure. At this level, fine. But if you start talking about individual cells having feeling, I disagree with you.
I clarified that. It's not.
Yeah, sure.
The cell was not feeling. I said it was moving towards a state of homeostasis.
Okay, good. Okay.
Reacting. You could say reacting and not use the word feeling, but choose the translation of your choice.
And it's amazing that unfeeling reaction can emerge feeling.
Though I would also say that it's not just about pain, it's also the opposite. It's going into wonder, that the experience, is the driving thing. The consciousness is sort of just like something that's kind of hanging on and is part and parcel of it. It's to go into wonder of experience. It's, Kant's all of the sky. That there's a drivenness in that direction, and that's what we're kind of driven to try to find. Sometimes we lose our way and fall away from it, but that's available to us all the time. And I think that's in there with the Chan Buddhism and the LSD also.
Well, we're heliotropic plants bent earthward that actually are suspended in the ether. Sorry, guys, I had to throw that out. Yeah.
Wait, did you just make that up?
Yeah.
No way.
Yeah. Okay, wait a minute, Scott. I got to point out something here. What is this chat thing it says here? David says here a while back, at Scott H, we should go fund your graphic novel version of Kant and the synthesis of apperception. So I have an offer for you.
Pixels. We got to have pixels, Scott. We got to see the pixels.
Gotta have pixels. Hey, Scott, I have a publishing agency. I would more than love to do a graphical novel of anybody here to do this, and let's elevate YouTube. So that's my offer before we chat off here.
Cool.
Oh, thank you. Yes.
I wanted to be the first one to mention ether tonight, but I blew it. I didn't get the gun. Didn't hear the gun.
Yeah, I mean, I get Patrick's point, and that there are other critiques. I mean, let's give this critique, a break, because it's only trying to explain how we can do science of the physical world, and consider that we don't go outside the bounds with our wonder while we do it, because that's a different level. This is about the really what's the word? Obsessive scientific endeavor. This is the critical Kant checking out the nerds, and if they're wondering, he says, "Hey, get back to work." You know, this is
But
not.
Kant is saying Hume is right and Newton is right. And then everyone else says, what the hell? How is that possible? And then that's the first. The first critique is the answer to the question, what do you mean Hume and Newton are both right? That's what the first critique is.
I think he's coming down heavily on the side of the rationalists myself. I don't think he's coming down on the side of Hume.
And Jacobi will suggest Kant's theory of knowledge is ultimately leading us towards complete egoism and nihilism.
Apprehension is based on apperception. So yes, it begins with the unity of the self. How's that nihilism?
Yeah, this is, well, Jacobi, it seems it's claiming here, coined the term nihilism.
Oh, okay.
So he's
Jacobi
is this particular philosopher. I just looked him up last week. I'm not too sure about who he is.
Well, he coined a good meme.
Yeah, could catch on.
Yeah, he was in that period. Was he before Kant or
a little bit after, I think.
A little after. Okay. Interesting. Yeah, I read something about Jacobi and Schopenhauer. I read most of Schopenhauer's.
This is from the lecturer's notes for this week.
Oh, okay, cool. Jacobi. Okay, well, that's something to add to the bucket list, right? Jacobi.
The lecturer's notes are quite interesting. They're worth having a bit of a review.
So here, how about this? Kant is in this issue of apperception. Kant is saying that the drive to know physical things, the drive to hallucinate and imagine physical unities in the passing pixel realm is the drive for self-consciousness, for epistemic self-consciousness. So that it's kind of like a drive. When you look out there, you're driven to synthesize pixels into this familiar thing about physical objects. That drive is simultaneously the drive to exist as like a experienced transcending subject that can span space, span time, find laws that run things over time, find algebraic laws of plotting and laws of geometry. So you're this compulsive synthesizer, and the coming together of nature through judgment is the coming together actually of self-consciousness. So the drive to wrap nature up into that Newtonian unity, the theory of everything, is also the drive to exist as a unified self-consciousness. Why? Because every way of variation that we get, we're a unity across. So every way of variation, and there's multiple. Space is a way of variation, time is a way. All these, Kant is saying that we're born with built-in ways of variation, and have a built-in drive for unity, and bring those two things together, and this is what you get. So we chop things up into space because we provide the wedge of space form. We chop things up together into this past that has past ED because we provide that mediator. And different hues being on a continuum, even the most qualitative things become quantified. So these are ways of variation that we automatically span over and unify. And that those two things, the automatic exploding along dimensions like space, time, magnitude, and the automatic compulsive recombining, those two things together produce the known nature and the self-conscious self.
This is applies to AI also, which really just freaks me out.
So what happens with a blind person that cannot perceive the visual world?
That's a good point. Yeah, that's a good point, Ada. The person who's born blind, who never actually gets to see anything, I think that they function visually fairly well, but they might have to be taught. They might actually have to be helped through it. So but I never done that. I don't know what happens.
They use the touch and proprioception. That's how they get spatial distance. So I say,
Yeah,
move
touching.
your hand.
Yeah.
And then they can feel the roughness of the table moving under their skin. So they know, oh, my hand has traveled. And the has traveled is space.
Cool.
Does anybody know if they see?
I think that I just like that the conversation evolved a little bit from the physical world to what we are actually imagining and perceiving, and the realities that we're telling ourselves, just more not in the physical world, but in the how we construct our reality and the feelings and the stories that we tell to ourselves.
I thought, yeah.
So
I
I
thought
like
about this a lot.
Just the transition. I think we were you were talking about like all these physical worlds, the pixels, and then how we transition into imagining things and what happens with those that cannot perceive the reality, the visual reality. So, and then is reality not just visual, but and someone mentioned about like how you connect and how you create those realities yourself to, I feel like everything connects with your sensational world on how your spine guides like how you perceive reality and how you synthesize that reality. I know I'm just like having all these ideas and connecting on what you're saying, but I don't think that just everything is validated by the physical world, but there are many things connected and realities.
So let me speak.
Many.
Yeah, thank you, Ada. Let me speak next because I had a lot of experience as a child daydreaming when I was like just in first grade and maybe a little bit in second grade too. I knew I had an issue daydreaming in class. The teacher would talk and I would be looking out the window a lot of the time. And I think that had something, later on I did extremely well in elementary school. I think by the time I was finished second grade, I was starting to do really well. So I think that looking out the window a lot was kind of this trying to synthesize appearances. In other words, we could call that this word synthesis. Ada is really important in Kant. The idea of synthesizing different concepts together, and even concepts that are we call them what do you call them? The multiples, the plural concepts, the ones that are composed of numbers of appearances and numbers of manifolds of concepts. So the manifolds would be combined with a particular main concept, and the imagination drives that, and the combination would results in higher understanding, and even in more pure concepts of the understanding. In other words, better and better understanding, so to speak. So there's a certain amount of experiencing that I think is basic that we have to do. We have to do it before we get to the first grade, or maybe we do it, not as much before the first grade and a lot in the first grade or something like that. But there's this kind of like imagining that has to go on in humans, and without that, we're kind of like left without all of these alternate realities to connect. And that connection of those realities, Ada, is kind of like what Kant would call the synthesis. In other words, you're going to have to synthesize something. And the synthesis is going to occur because you have these kind of, maybe they look like they're conflicting concepts, but they're contending. Let's say they're contending concepts, or you call them realities. People think there are realities. I don't think there are realities. I think I don't believe there's an objective reality. But these concepts are going to contend, and they're going to you're going to have resolutions. You're going to some of them are going to resolve themselves into others, because the mind does that.
Okay, well, here's a challenge for you, Ada. You've said that by acknowledgement, you said you're trying to synthesize and to, you know, take what James said and reiterate it. So you're synthesizing your experience here tonight. And I'll evaluate that and think about how much was experience and how much was cognition, right? How much, like, just examine it in what that, and how you actually process that. How did you synthesize it?
Yeah, I'm thinking to be able to understand what you're saying, I need to have an understanding of the words that you're saying in first place. And maybe I'm creating a reality of what you're saying by thinking I have understanding of the words you're saying. So I can even probably create my own reality of what's happening in this conversation. And maybe you mean something and I'm interpreting something different. Probably I'm going beyond what we're trying to describe here, but I'm just trying to say, I do see that there's a physical things that we can do fact check on, like, okay, this is real and I'm living this real universe. But when it comes down to like a more elevated consciousness, it becomes cultural as well, of what things are sharing, the language, the words, the concepts that we are describing. So, and these experience realities, I don't really understand if there are different realities in the sense of like the physical world. I don't think so, but more around the cultural, or how, like, as here it's a group of people studying philosophy, right? And your level of consciousness is different than engineers or accountants, and the way you talk and perceive the world is just different. So I don't know if I'm responding the question clearly, but
No, I think you're on the right track. So you've said that there's an epistemic reality, that you know that there's an existence out there. Well, how do you know it? Because we have this body of collective social knowledge that says that we do have this reality, right? And that is something that we gain by by our society, right? I mean, how do I know of 2,500 years of collective knowledge? In part because of our culture and how that's aggregated and then disseminated towards to every individual, including everyone here. So there's some epistemic translation of metaphysics, and that's where I was trying to go with Scott earlier on, was to say I didn't really quite understand about how metaphysics was always absolute, because I kind of equate it to thinking and abstraction. My easiest heuristic for metaphysics is simply mathematics. It's the quintessential ontological framework for metaphysics, which would be, the language of God, and I'm not invoking any kind of dude in the sky with a beard. I'm just saying the manifestation of a collective human thought, right? Culture, of eusociality. And you have then individual perceptions that reconcile against the cultural apparatus, essentially, right? And then the ideal form of the cultural apparatus is, again, evoking the God hypothesis, which is why from the Nietzsche perversion, I just don't give it to him that it's dead. Not because I'm advocating, I can say that as an atheist, but the ideal of something, which is the origin of which is a Platonic origin, is, it's unavoidable. We can't not think of something that's ideal.
Right. So it's sort of like one dead philosopher does not, qualify as a measure for whether God's alive or dead. But the idea that God is dead is an important concept
I agree.
to wrestle with, in a concept in terms of our society and the way we behave and establish authority and values and things like that. But to me, within the realm of Kant, he says, actually, no, it does not vary over time whether God lives or dies. It's a structure of reason that determines that. And if you're not in that ballpark, fine. But if you want to talk about reason, I have a way to talk about it. And if you want to talk about science, there aren't two objective worlds. There's one objective world, and this is how you talk. It's not a woo-woo thing that this culture had a different objective world. No, there is one unified objective world, and this is how it's created, and this is how reason works. And if you're not talking about reason, it's what happens in your mind when you take LSD. Go ahead. Okay, there's no volume on that because we're not doing a study of psychology and drug alterations of the mind. We're only talking about these things in these books because he's he's not a joker. He's just doing this stuff.
Yeah, but he's not right about everything, David. He's in fact, he's highly contested in his time, after his time, nowadays. Everything about Kant, is like kind of up for grabs a little bit.
Yeah.
The fact that his system makes a lot of sense is wonderful. That is kind of like you could take all these ideas, and some of them you can weigh and actually come to grips with and sort of like appreciate. Other ones, not so much, And that's all I would say about Kant. Yeah, go ahead.
It sort of alleviates the need to argue about solipsism. I mean, or whether or not there can be a science, or whether or not there can be a logical structure of discussing morality.
Sure.
It's like, if you don't read this, don't read Euclid and do geometry, but you're really going to be missing something when you talk to a geometer. There is.
Yeah, no, he had a lot of good ideas.
Yeah, and it's a basis. It's like a kernel to work from. If you don't look at Euclid and you're going to talk about triangles, it's really kind of now you're really abstract, and I'm not sure what we're talking about.
I don't know if I said Euclid. Sorry about that. Daniel, I like the topic of metaphysics, and the way I see metaphysics is a tool bag. You can use these tools in the tool bag, but don't think that you can't think of them as facts. They're just tools, and like even things like God and freedom.
Yeah.
If you use them as tools, they're extremely powerful and effective. If you try to approach them as facts, I have freedom, or we need to have freedom, or or there's not enough freedom, or we need more freedom. That you can do those kind of determinations. You can make those determinations, especially when you use comparison. You can say, I like the United States because we have more freedom to do to change jobs than people in China or some other place. So you get this. You could do things with metaphysical concepts through comparison, but you can't ever. They're never absolute. So that's kind of my opinion. And this is even true with God. The people who really believe in God, they don't believe God is absolute. They just basically understand that without God, there a lot of the structure that they think is important for human existence would disappear, and that's why they're theists.
I understand the utility of metaphysics. In fact, that I'd recommend anybody in here. I'd recommend a book to anybody in here from an author by the name of Hofstadter. He was a cognitive scientist, a physicist, and he writes about the he's written about Gödel, and I think there's one book in particular, I Am a Strange Loop, which is particularly good and contemporary. So
that's my friend's favorite book. My best read friend, who's a Korean neuroscientist, said that his favorite book in the world is that book, I Am a Strange Loop. He's brilliant.
I've read his books 2 or 3 times, and I highly recommend it. That's kind of interesting that I brought that up then. Yeah. Anybody else?
I think in the end, these are, as you're saying, tools to reflect on thoughts. And you need to study those tools very well to be able to understand things and ideas.
Well, just think about thinking. This is something that, it's an innate quality that we have. So, as you're processing something, try and try and think about what you're doing. I don't know how to, just be aware of what your mind's doing. That's the biggest litmus test you have. And then if you get in the weeds with a particular thinker or philosopher, they can be very challenging. So, you know, it's fun stuff. As you can see, everybody in here is kind of addicted to them. So, because once you get into it, it's, you know.
Yeah, I see.
You know, it's a
I
life
was just
study, right?
thinking of, sorry, I do understand that this is specifically to discuss this reading and the ideas of certain philosophers, and I do see that. I'm just thinking of potential traps that you can have. I just recently was as you're saying, being conscious of where your brain is taking you, and what happens when you let your brain take you to certain biases, right? So how do you? And we were talking about, well, you were talking about this perception and ideas, imagination, and I started thinking, okay, when you can start imagining something that it's probably not real, and this is just going outside of the concepts and tools that you are discussing here. So it's just a thought.
Well, imagination is a pretty important, you know, function and constituent of the brain. So, I mean, don't easily dismiss the ability that we have to imagine, right? I'd say explore it and try to. I mean, it's not an ethical statement like Kant uses for a categorical imperative, but when I write about this word weld of categorical imperative, and you know, there's a propensity that we have to draw categories around things in order to frame them and make sense, add order to our knowledge, right? And so ultimately, is that an ethical claim? I mean, kind of, yeah. It's widening the net of the ethical claim of the categorical imperative. Ethics, I mean, I guess, is kind of the idea.
Yeah.
Does Kant say that, I have a question. Does Kant say that the categories are limits of possible experience?
Well, I like the idea of limits. You're right on that part. They are limits, right? He tries to, the categories, they are limits, and Scott explained them really well, because they don't they reduce down to something and then no more, right? And so those are the core constituents as far as he can see it, and those are the categories in which he's been able to distill down to a finite limit. Right?
The real categories, the categories are universals that are derivative, but the pure concepts are functions of unity in judgment, which means proposition. So Kant is saying that in order for pixels to fall under the subject position, this, and also fall under the predicate position, which will be some property, in order for pixels to divide themselves up metaphysically into things that fall under subject and predicate, they have to undergo some really tortuous, weird fantasizing. And so the imagination produces these fantasies. One of them is a point moving across space, smearing unity. That makes body, extension in space. We don't get that. We get pixels side by side. Here's another one. The journey of a point through space as time is passing, and we'll just declare that it's the same self. It's the same point. That's substance. Now it's pushing its identity through time. Well, that's a fantasy that you do. Kant says that we have to carry out an action to make this content. Before we do this, there's no content. It's just pixels. So we pause at a point and we drag it. And when we do that, we with our power of intentionality, we fantasize a metaphysical existence into existence. And then we say, oh, that's what's happening with the pixel to let them fall under this. Or that's what's happening to the pixels to let it fall under green, which would be hue, and hue is a continuum. So Kant is saying that we make these continuums, and these are actions that we do, and then we project these out into the pixel realm and say, Behind the pixels, there is a body, it's extended in space, and it's existing through time. Well, all that stuff you're saying is shit that you've invented in your imagination.
Is there a category of numbers?
Yep. Yes, that's, and numbers come from, well, you could create what he calls quantum, which is continuous magnitude, and that's a spatial thing. In fact, he says this, and this is one of the strongest metaphors in the whole book. He says that space is the image of magnitude.
So which is the perfect number?
The perfect number.
Yeah, well, if I have a category of lines, we're going back to the scholastics at the moment. If we have a category of lines, I might be just able to imagine a perfect line. But if I've got a category of numbers,
all lines
which is
are
a perfect
all
number?
All lines are perfect. All circles are perfect. All squares are perfect.
Okay, no, I want to handle this one.
And with this comment, I hereby declare my thesis on Plato's idea that the forms are perfect, is because you can't have unperfect geometrical figures. How about that? So geometry is a real domain where perfection and existence are commingled necessarily. Isn't that funny? And then maybe that's why he says that perfection is an essential aspect of the forms. Anyway,
well, I might be able to argue, this is scholastics again, that I can take this lion sitting in a zoo, there's another lion running around Africa. Yeah, they are different lions and they are a little bit different, but they would claim to be part of the same category. So I could look for the perfect lion there, but numbers.
Oh my God, you're talking about lions?
Perfect lion.
Numbers are completely different things. One lion might resemble another lion, but a 1 is not the same thing as a 2. In fact, if you try to put a 2 in your computer program where a 1's supposed to go,
time out.
Trouble.
Stephen, you realize that we all thought you were talking about a lion, or a line, not a lion.
Categories. You've got a category of lion. You've got a category of numbers. This is the scholastics. This is what they used to argue about.
We thought you meant a straight line. We thought you meant like a
accent. Points. You have an accent.
Yeah, the problem is that Scott was talking gibberish and Stephen misunderstood.
You thought I was on drugs. No, actually, I thought you said L-I-N-E.
Yes.
I give a whole discourse on
lions. Yeah,
very inspired.
That's all a lion. Yeah.
Now it's all starting to make sense.
Scott, we got to talk more because that is right up my alley. And I told you before about the dimensionality of the point. And so we should talk.
Okay. Okay, yeah, here. So if you're curious about well, just real quick, I'll just give one example. Here is how Kant says that logical forms of judgment are involved in numbers. So you drag a point across space and you make magnitude. That's fine. He calls that unity, and that's created by the universal quantifier all. Isn't that bizarre? You think it'd be the other way around. So through the power of all, which is like a logical operator, all men are mortal, that guy, Kant says, hey, everybody, I'm going to use you to make number. So all is what goes across that thing and makes it into a unity. And then sum is the power of chopping. So you chop that unity into a plurality. And then there's a third operation, which is the plurality in the unity. That's the number. So a number is a plurality in unity, and it's made by having a span that's been chopped and then counted, recombined by counting. Is that interesting? So that's how he gets
the claim is
logical forms.
The claim is there is no real category of numbers.
An act of construction. I just wanted to show that this is maybe this is a point of criticism. It seems like a stretch, doesn't it? It seems like a stretch to say that all and some are part of the mechanics that we use for counting. But Kant is you see, he's kind of committed to this thesis that logical forms of unity are the glue of synthesis. And even in the case of counting, he makes a plausible story that all and some are part of what we do to chop things into number. Anyway,
Scott, you've shown that it's a concept. You've shown that it's a pure concept. but it's not a category because it's not one of the fundamental pure concepts, right? It's an a priori concept, but it's not a category. So Steve's question, if it wasn't about roaring lions.
Well, it is. It is a category. It is a category.
The scholastics are arguing that lions was a real category. Lions, the ones that growl.
Did you say these are not? Did you say these are not Kant lions? These are Rorty lions, David?
I don't know.
Look, I'll give you an example of the importance of this question. Now, if numbers are not a real category, there is no way you can use a numbers system to win in a casino.
It is a category. It is. Number is a category.
Well, then you believe that it's possible to create a numbers system to win in a casino.
It's an empirical question.
You're claiming that there is an actual real relationship between one number and another. Therefore, the numbers that come up later on the real wheel will be determined by the numbers that came up earlier. So you get down that casino and start using that number system there.
You're right. That's right. Yeah, Kant's model is Laplacian like that. If you know the values of all the variables, if you know the value of the position and the momentum of every particle at t equals n, then backwards and forwards you can go as far as you like if you have the transformation rules, if you have the laws of nature. So you tell me the value of all the variables right now at this instant in time, and if I know if I have all the functions, I can plug in values and I can tell you where Mercury will be in 100 years, which I can actually to the centimeter. So nature is calculable. Its states are calculable.
You could be sending your soul to eternal damnation with thoughts like that.
Maybe. But it's
You're getting into dangerous territory there.
Why?
That's right. But Kant says
heretical.
He says that nature is completely determined and God is completely free in it, and so are we. That's his solution. His solution is the depressing solution of this compatibilism. So internally, I'm free to do what I want to, and yet God has omniscience. That's another version of this problem. Internally, I'm free to do.
So who's tried a numbers system at the casino or similar?
My uncle's a professional blackjack player. What do you want to know?
Yeah. Blackjack? No, I'm talking about that's not quite
if you
the same
know
thing.
the position of every
Roulette's
atom in the casino, you don't even have to know what the people are thinking. If you know the position and the momentum of every subatomic particle in the casino, you'll know exactly where the ball will be on the roulette wheel. Yeah,
so of course. There's no room for chance. Chance.
Not in the
there's
casino.
no such thing as chance.
No. Matter is well behaved, and it's enslaved by laws that happen to be mathematical.
Yeah, but what about entropy, Scott?
Ooh. Oh, that just sounds so wicked.
Yeah, Scott, what about entropy?
That's Rudolf Steiner's Aramitic there.
Steiner who?
Fine. That's
Rudolf Steiner. He used the term
if you're concerned about it, just invoke the measurement problem. Because the Schrodinger wave equation is completely deterministic. But the Heisenberg matrix thing, that's your wedge. That's where you can come in. So if you're using matrix mechanics, then it's not a problem. But the Schrodinger wave equation is totally deterministic. Isn't that funny? So quantum physics is really a deterministic theory. It's just as deterministic as classical and relativistic.
So I'm going to take a Kant vacation, I think. Does anyone have some ideas where I could go?
Oh, for our next. Oh, just personally on reading, you mean?
Just a personal Kant vacation. Yeah, I think I just
try a
chapter one. I finished chapter 1 in the transcendental deduction. I'm kind of ready for. What was that, Stephen?
Go to a Greek monastery and get some old time medieval
let's do
religion.
That. Number 2.
Religion, yeah.
You got to escape from the Newtonian Copernican world conception. That's where we started going wrong.
If you read Ayn Rand, you'll be right back for more Kant.
Rand will take care of it. Yeah. Okay.
No, I agree. Why don't we do something more contemporary, like Hofstadter?
Or Hegel. Yeah, but yeah, you're right. Hofstadter would be more contemporary. Yeah. I already shied out of a Hofstadter meeting once. I didn't like the first chapter, but that's just me.
I don't know if anybody's heard of George Steiner. He's a critic. He's one of my favorite writers. He passed away in February. But I really like his work and his writing style. So if you guys want to check him out, he's one of my all-time faves. He's pretty dense in his writing style, a lot of references, dense intellectual poetry, as I like to call it.
Oh, it's not philosophy or mathematics or anything specific.
Well, he's a critic, so he's a critic, but he's very, very much steeped in philosophy and art and culture. And I think that synthesis on its own is really interesting, right? So, he just, that's what he is. He's a critic.
Not hard to get a group on the schedule, Daniel, if you want.
I was actually talking about the arguments between the nominalists and the realists in the Middle Ages, before things got too complex. You ever heard of them, the scholastic arguments between the nominalists and the realists?
I think
Thomas Aquinas versus William of Ockham and all that.
Yeah.
William the what?
William of Ockham.
Like the Occam razor, and then Thomas Aquinas, which actually is pretty fascinating with Thomas Aquinas, because he tried to reconcile church doctrine with 100% rationalistic thought, which I think is really interesting. And that's
that is interesting. When mythology gets debugged by philosophy, all sorts of things happen.
Yeah. So that's where I think there's a historical relevance, is to go and study that kind of thinking. And I think that there's a historical repercussion that is, I guess, Hegelian in its forward motion. We call it progress if you want, but it's just some sort of inevitability of progression through time.
And the soul of simple substance is not pure rationality. It comes from mythology. That's right.
And that's, it's interesting, because when a theologian posits something that is almost doctrinal, like look at Heidegger, his suppositional statement, all-encompassing God, or Dasein, it essentially is the unity of that subject predicate scenario, right? So this the subject predicate in one sort of becoming and being is effectively what the Heidegger doctrine is all about.
That's similar to what's his name, Spinoza, a little bit. The elevation of God into a truly infinite powerful being through Dasein, which is so it's he's following Nietzsche and pulling the rug out from under the theists, that's for sure. But there is a shred of truth in that, because he's following the Spinozan view of a pantheistic God that resembles man. Yeah.
But he seems
You're
to
taking definitions seriously and reifying them fully. Yeah, you can, if you take
but the difference with someone like Heidegger or somebody like Spinoza is that, for me, and I'm using a reference, a more contemporary for me form, which is essentially Platonic, but I don't know, some sort of libertarian sort of defense or whatever. It's kind of ridiculous. But if I say for me and then follow it up with something like the difference between a Spinoza thought, and then you have Heidegger. Heidegger still has something that goes through him. It's still dogmatic in origin and elevated to some sort of level of conceit, where Spinoza seems to be, much more universal and humble and detached. So I do see just a complete difference between the two. I just
I don't-
draw distinctions.
I don't get it that way at all. I don't
Really.
see it that way at all, Daniel. I've read Spinoza. I read the Ethics all the way through. And
Yeah,
I've read Being and Time, and I see them as very similar methodologically. They don't put too much of the personal self into the. Heidegger doesn't put any more of his self into that book than Spinoza puts into the Ethics. Spinoza did write books on other things. He wrote books on religion and so forth, and his personality comes through more strongly elsewhere. So if you're talking about some other books by Heidegger, maybe there are some books where, but the thing is, Heidegger was a academic, and the academic tone is very strong, I think, in Heidegger. And Spinoza was probably more diverse. He was a scientist as well as an oculist, as well as and a person that was dedicated to religion, as well as a philosopher. So he might come off a little bit more balanced. I love Spinoza, no question about that. But I don't see Heidegger as different. I see Heidegger's book as reminiscent of Spinoza's detachment, because he doesn't say Heidegger doesn't say I'm a big deal any place. He says that we are. He uses the plural when he refers to himself. He says we intend to show a couple times, but not in every chapter.
Yeah. Okay. I think maybe it actually it doesn't really matter. I guess it's just kind of the heuristic that I use. I mean, and I guess there's something like Heidegger's background was as a theologian, and not so much with the Jewish sort of upbringing of Spinoza. So I guess, yeah, it doesn't really matter. I mean, yeah. Interesting. Thank you for that. Yeah. So what everybody was suggesting, maybe what to read. What did you filter out on? What were you thinking of reading, James?
Oh, me?
Yeah.
I have to read Heidegger. I'm in a Heidegger. I have this group that I'm trying to balance the reading between this group and a Heidegger group, and so I really need to just get on the ball with the Heidegger group and not. I'm looking. The next thing in front of me on the Kant is the 25 pages of the A edition on the section 2 of the A edition in the A edition, and after that comes section 2 in the B edition, and it's a little bit daunting. I'm thinking I'm so exhausted from the section 1 that I'm thinking I'm going to take a rest now on the Kant and just concentrate on the Heidegger. But and I'm also feeling like I don't have that much to defend. I read the Kant, I come to the meeting, I kind of like want to talk about Kant, but we've got all these other kind of like subjects in the real world to discuss, and I think that's fine. But it's not sort of like I don't feel like this is an essential discussion of Kant. If this is going to last a lot longer, I'd probably want to go off and join that other guy's group in Chicago. I'm not sure if he's in Chicago. He might be in San Francisco, but it's or Portland. But it's kind of like it's not. I would probably want something a little more academic at this point.
Yeah.
But the freewheeling discussion is fine. I'm okay with that. And we're going to get to Hegel eventually. I'm kind of experienced in Hegel, so that'll be a little more fun for me.
Cool.
So, David, we're all set for next week?
Yeah, it's already on the schedule. Week
Yeah.
8 of Kant. Maybe that'll be the last. We'll see. And then we'll go into Hegel.
Good.
So that's the plan.
Great. So we're going to all be energized. That's great. For
Yeah,
the next week, the
Emmanuel
last
Easy.
week of
There's a
Emmanuel Easy.
yeah,
Essay? Emmanuel Easy or Emmanuel Essay?
as Easy, The Color of Reason. That might generate some interesting conversation next week.
The Color of Reason?
That's the
Is
one.
that in your, is that going to be in the
It's on the
post?
description right there.
On the description.
This is week 8. There's the lecture and there's the reading.
Color of Reason.
That's it for
Oh
next
my
week.
gosh. Lovely. Thank you. Well, that's a good break. That's not good. That's what I was looking for. Some excuse not to dive right into section 2.
So that'll be next week, and that might end our Kant. We'll have to see. We may do another week after that, but we'll get to Hegel eventually.
Great.
Yeah, you can put a group on the schedule, Daniel, for
Oh goodness. Okay.
an author
Well,
if you want.
like
It's not hard at all.
You might
Well,
get a
what is
lot of
everybody-
people to
Wednesday
come.
nights or Thursday nights, anytime. You know, there's nothing's happening on Thursday nights. I've noticed nobody does anything on Thursday nights. There's
well,
an
would
opening.
anybody be interested in doing some Steiner study? I'd have to put a consensus out for you guys to look at them first.
George Steiner,
Yeah,
was it?
Yeah.
George Steiner. I haven't heard of him.
I know. That's why I want to give him some attention and some props, right? Because he's an amazing intellect, and his writing is phenomenal. But and it's densely packed with a lot of real juicy bits. So
Yeah, but it's not just us. I mean, put it out to the network of everybody. You know.
Oh, right. Oh, it should
Are
be.
you familiar with Jacob Bronowski?
No, I haven't. What?
Oh my!
Just Google search him.
If I would be stuck on an island with anyone, it would be him. He did this BBC series. It was the second educational documentary series in television history. It was called The Ascent of Man. It is the best thing I've ever seen on television in any genre.
What's his
It's
name?
even better than Exorcist. It's called the Ascent of Man. He goes from the development of the human body all the way to quantum mechanics, and he has this incredible scene in Auschwitz. So he does what James Burke tried to do in that other BBC series, The Day the Universe Changed, and James Burke Connections. Remember James Burke Connections?
Excellent.
Those
Yeah.
are great shows. So Bernowski's is even better than that. It's called The Ascent of Man.
I remember it. I watched it back in the 70s. Yeah, you can find bits of it on YouTube sometimes.
That would be
You know,
great if
like-
we instead of doing like a reading study, because these are on YouTube, we could do like a YouTube I mean, everybody knows how to do that. We could watch and discuss that series. I'm looking at it right now. That's really good. Yeah, put out by BBC. I think that's great.
It shows how like philosophy and science come out of real life. So like, for one example, he talked about at the beginning, humans built things in the way that we dominate clay. So the clay is soft and it conforms to our hands. But as soon as you discover the grain in rock and in wood, then there's a total shift in your relationship to nature, and you realize that you master it by surrendering to its joints, to its nature. So you start penetrating it. Then the next step after that, the next chapter is what? Fire. Because fire lets you cut beneath the level of the molecule. And then he talks about the development of chemistry. It's incredible. And he's so poetic. He wrote a thesis on Milton. This guy is the most, every time he speaks, you cry. So he's like this really poetic, beautiful guy that connects things to history like that. And it's like astonishing. Every episode, you're like, Jesus Christ. You feel like you've seen 2001.
Okay, so how do I put one? I like that idea. How do I put that on the meetup then?
Okay, I guess. Well, get it ready, get a description, and I'll put it on mine, and I'll post it to the Slack group for the Virtual Philosophy Network to advertise for others. And I know Portland, Seattle, Chicago, Toronto, they take virtually everything. Philadelphia, there's about 7.
I think that's a great idea. I'd love to do that series. That looks really good, Scott.
Oh, it's incredible. I mean, it is so great. It's like hearing Beethoven for the first time after all you've heard was like MC Hammer your whole life. It's so well done. It's life changing.
Okay, are you gonna come to them on Thursday nights?
Well, yeah, I will. Yeah, for me, it's like religion. He's like a religious figure for me.
Okay. All right, let's set it up then. I'll just do up the description and then I'll send that in and we'll start doing it.
Daniel, you could still buy George Steiner's biography of Martin Heidegger.
Oh, I have it. I have all Steiner's stuff.
You have it? Oh yeah, cool.
Yeah,
cool.
that's
you might know more about Heidegger, his life than I do. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, I'll try to I might get that. Sounds good.
The magic with Steiner is that you have to focus not on his bigger narratives. You have to look at all the references that he's putting into a sentence, into a paragraph, and just spend some time. Don't be rushed to read it. Try and get his references. Try and get the beauty of all of the education that he's putting into that, into his writing, and you'll be hooked.
That's great.
Maybe.
Well, I think he sounds. He's also current. He's he's just passed away, so he's fresh. So we should definitely enjoy reading books by more contemporary than people from 3 centuries ago.
He was actually really amazing because he had I think he'd studied with Levi Strauss, and he'd been in Princeton, with all the physicists, and it just like he was a living legend, really, as far as I'm concerned. He's just
That's cool.
a polyglot that spoke multiple languages. He's just phenomenal.
And so what do you recommend by him? What's his best thing?
Well, it depends how you learn, right? Like what I usually do if I like a book, I look to see if he's got something audible as well as something as a book, right? Because I can have an added dimension of learning if I can hear it in an audible format as well.
Oh,
so
this is okay.
So if you guys
sorry.
If you guys have access, or you guys consume books in an audible format, he has 2 titles on Audible. One is on Heidegger and the other one is on Grammars of Creation. And Grammars of Creation was something that he did for the Massey lectures. So that's a very good one, along with the book, Grammars of Creation. And then there's his book on Heidegger, and that's also an Audible. So it's good to hear someone like, I think the narrator is Robert Bloomingfield. So it's good to hear how it's narrated. And then I do that in combination with the book, make notes on the book. And that's where I would start, was with those 2 titles. And then he has things like the Tower of Babel, or the Quest for the Absolute, or, but at that point, if you're, then you can just get into the straight reading, because those aren't inaudible.
I think that was the book I read first, the George Steiner's Heidegger, actually.
Oh, really?
So,
yeah,
I think so. It's a positive book, but it's not exactly representative. It's a kind of it's not the best approach, but it's what you would call a literary approach, probably. to Heidegger. It doesn't tell you a lot about the. It gives you some of the basics of the philosophy. It's more of a readable referential book.
Yeah. Well, because the beauty I think that I like of Heidegger is, or of Steiner, is that there's always a lot of literary references, right? So literary and art references, and so that really makes and contextualizes the knowledge and contextualizes it for me to a point where, you know, I can you know, understand his references to music and composers and all of that sort of, you know, cultural comparison and context, right? So
yeah, that's a good thing. Yeah, I enjoyed reading the book, but then later when I actually read Heidegger, I found out that Heidegger was the whole thing in itself compared
yeah,
to
of course,
what Steiner was describing. Yeah.
And then the Grammars of Creation. Well, that one's I don't know how many times I've read that one.
It's a good title.
So what are the top two titles?
I would say Heidegger and Grammars of Creation, only because they have audible versions as well, and everybody's busy. You can kind of, you know, cycle to work, well, not to work or whatever you do. You can go out for a walk and you can kind of just listen to it. You can kind of get the cadence of what he's, you know, how he writes and how he thinks, and it's Robert Blumenfeld's you know, a pretty good voice for the narration of it.
Yeah, you're saying he's a listenable author, and that's a good compliment. It's not like reading Being in Time, you know, where you have to stop to say, "God damn it, what the fuck?" You know, did he mean?
Well, what I do and how I analyze a text, I mean, I have lots of tools. Some of them I've come up with myself, but what I do with the text is I use Google Books. And so I have a virtual version of the book, and I can create notes, you know, similar to or analogous to writing in the margins like you would do. And so I can take the Google book and I can write, you know, notes all throughout the book, and it syncs it onto my Google Drive. And so that's how I interact with the text. You know, looking up references, what is he talking about when he, you know, drops this name or that? Like, he drops a ton, like, you know, there's so many references. And then when you start piecing all the cultural references together, you can see what really, like, the fumigated hive of Proust. Like, what is he talking about? What is he talking about Proust, you know, in that context, right?
So then you have to go read Proust to
just even
figure it out. I don't know.
Yeah, you get sucked down another hole, but you're trying to figure, okay, what is he making in reference to this? And it's all literary. It's not, you know, it's all this rich cultural richness that kind of spans right across multiple languages, right? He has this thing where he says, well, what is it like to make love in multiple languages? Well, because I mean, he academically taught, I think, in English, French, German, you know, I mean, you know, quite the polyglot.
Yeah.
And so if you can, you know, I'm very envious. I really wish I could understand, and I'll use the word think, in ancient Greek. I mean, how amazing, what a gift that would be. Because if you go and you look at anything by Plato, and you go on Wikipedia and you look at all the hundreds of translations, and then you get into, you're reading something by Plato and somebody uses the word grace, and I'm just like, I feel like throwing the book down. Like, what is that? Like, it's so, you have to you know, we have to untangle all the translations. That's frustrating to me, because I absolutely love Plato, right? I keep always coming back to the footnotes.
Yeah, I like Plato. Plato is nice. It's good. It's good entry level philosophy. It can be disturbing. You read it and you'll sort of like get that kind of Nietzschean view of Socrates. You know, it's like, why is he always arguing with everyone? Why is he always making why is he always making bad arguments as well as good arguments, and things like that. So it's kind of like you can get a little bit disturbed reading Plato too.
Yeah, it's
But it is an integral style. He has a style that he sticks to, and it's mostly easy to read. But but the Socrates character is a little hard to figure out sometimes. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting you draw the comparison between Plato, Socrates, and Nietzsche, because Nietzsche kind of abhorred Socrates. He thought it was more of a decadence, and that's why I kind of look at it as look at it as a perversion of sorts. Really, this concept of, or Nietzsche. I just like the Duchamp hanging on the wall. That's kind of how I view Nietzsche, despite his alpinism.
Yeah, he was a man of his time. Yeah, man of his times. Everything is torn apart, and it does not even all philosophers. It's people, just everyday life tears that apart too. The book that the excerpts that were presented to us were almost all about philosophy, but there's also there's a whole book about science. What is that? Human all too human. There's like books that are just tearing apart society, culture, tearing culture apart. So it's not even.
Okay, see you all guys another time.
Yeah, thanks. Very nice to see you, Stephen.
See you on Saturday.
Yeah.
Thanks, Stephen, for drawing the line. That was so funny, eh?
But yeah, I like those. I like the both. I still have dialogues that I want to go back and reread. I think so that come up from time to time. Yeah. And I haven't finished The Republic, so I'm a very bad conservative. If I was a more serious conservative, I would have read The Republic a couple times.
Yeah, they're the kind of things.
I know some people that do that. Yeah.
The kind of books I keep going back to, right? I remember when the first time somebody gave me The Republic, I was like, yeah, I read it. And then afterwards, I feel how stupid that sounds. Like, you can reread it, and as you kind of progress in knowledge and understand more, you could reread it and you pull more from the text. You know what I mean? So
sure, yeah.
Just one reading of it, it doesn't quite work that way, or at least it hasn't for me. And I keep going back to that. There was one, I think it's one academic went through and systematized every character reference in the entire body of Plato's work, and not just his agreed upon dialogues, but even the ambiguous ones, the ones that were questionable as if they were even written by him, and pulled out all the references to people, and then expanded on them and who those people were historically. And it's a great reference book to as a companion to read as you're reading Plato, right? So that's
right. Yeah, Plato can be your life's work, no question about it. It's a big body of work, and all those characters and hidden meanings. Sure.
Yeah, for sure.
And some of these guys were actually philosophers in their own right, but I don't know if Plato was the be-all and end-all of describing their philosophy, but some of them were. I think Anaxagoras shows up in one or two dialogues. Very important philosophers.
Yeah, well, I actually, I think somebody that's kind of overlooked is Socrates, actually, because we have one title called The Art of Rhetoric that was lost, but in today's parlance, we look at rhetoric, and it's got such a negative connotation. And rhetoric is, if you just look at it from a standpoint of convincing speech, I took it one step further and started looking at the bone die, the astraguli, right? So this astraguli was a bone die, which gave us our first concept of probabilities. So effectively the 80-20 rule. So you would roll these bone die, and there was a 20% chance that it ended on one of two sides and an 80% chance that it would land on the other two sides, right? And the bone die was just essentially like a sheep bone, a knuckle bone, right? And so you'd throw these, and they call it a Venus throw. And so think of Yahtzee, for example. So you get a Yahtzee, you have all the same numbers, but a Venus throw was they were all different. So you would have, all different sides of the bone die. If you go A, B, C, D, you'd have then a throw that would be A, B, C, D, and that would be called a Venus throw. And I don't know, maybe years later, it turned into some sort of perversion of some other thing. But as the Greeks did, it's like the first concept of probabilities, right? And so I write about that a lot, and so
Sounds like a golden circle a little bit too. The 80-20 rule. Yeah, that sounds very interesting.
Well, we're so tied into probabilities and mathematical models and stuff right now that it's interesting that
yeah.
I guess. And why did I bring that up in comparison to Isocrates? Well, because there's some predictability in just framing what you want to do for the convincing speech, right? I mean, like, what are the this is how you kind of frame a defense, or what are the chances that this is going to be perceived well? And so our projection into the future has to do with the chances of it being consumed, and the chances of it being retained. And if it doesn't get retained, then it's useless. So how do you build that into your theoretical model? And so I think there's some validity to that, other than the just drawing the lion or the line and saying that it's absolute all or nothing. It's retention is also really important, right?
Yeah. Well, some of these things are universals. So like even though you sort of think that they're kind of esoteric, they might be universals, like what you were talking about with the bones, the 80-20 rule. I'm a part-time gambler. I live in Las Vegas, and I use that. I use 4 to 5 ratio quite a bit. I'm a former musician. I used to, of course, that's all. If you've ever played a string instrument, it's all kind of measured distances on the fretboard. 1/2, 1/3, 1/4. They all form note relationships. So and the compounds of those do as well. So universals are a beautiful thing. If somebody uses a universal, even if it was in ancient Greece, it's not going to disappear. It's going to show up again, in many other centuries.
Yeah. Guys, my brain's getting tired. It's best in the morning, but we don't have meetups in the morning, so I think I gotta sign off here.
All right. I saw the meetup where you guys were staying up late at night. I didn't follow it all the way to the end, but you guys were 4.5 hours, I think, that one.
Well, we're gonna have like a symposium. I don't drink anymore, but that's what we're supposed to be. That's what real men did back in the old days.
Ah, okay. Well, but make sure you invite me.
Yeah, it's BYOB, or bring your own whatever you want.
I got a stash here. Don't worry.
Yeah, we could have something where every time you spoke, you had to have a shot or something.
Oh, there we go. There we go. Yeah. Something highly philosophical.
Yeah. All right, guys, I'm out of here. That was great. Thank you.
Night, everybody.
I think we're done. All right. Next week,
Yeah,
everyone.
Thank you, David.
Sure. Next week.
Night, everybody. Yeah. Night, Scott. Both Scots.